Welcome everyone to episode 89 of the Lookout Sir Warhammer 40,000 podcast. 89 episodes of glorious Warhammer 40,000 related fun, and in each of those introduced by me, your good buddy Dan, who now, by extension, will introduce his good buddy Phil. How's it going, Philip?
Well, I'm here. I've survived the week. A little background context for everyone. I've been severely ill for the entire week, and Dan almost had to get someone else to come in to do the podcast.
Yep, that did very nearly happen. I did almost have to find a last-minute replacement. Phil informed me at the beginning of the week that he was down with the sickness. Noting for any of you who are immediately worried, it's nothing of any kind of long-term negative consequences, right, Phil? It wasn't dealing with any of the super serious ailments out there. You just had a little bit of a runny tummy, shall we say?
Yes, yeah. It was nothing COVID-related. It was a different kind of nurgle of the tummy and other parts related. Oh, joy.
Indeed. It was a glorious time for you. Your explanation of the last few evenings and the sheer misery that you have endured brought a smile to my face, I've got to be honest.
Well, that's something. You know, that's what Papa Nurgle would want.
Exactly. Joy and the spreading of pestilence. That is Papa Nurgle's way. Or is it Grandfather Nurgle?
I think it's both.
Both simultaneously. There you go. I mean, you know, Phil, you've become well acquainted with Nurgle over the recent days. But there you go. Yeah, so Phil's down with the sickness, so he's not his usual chirpy self. Again, the differences between chirpy Phil, jolly Phil, or, you know, potentially kind of, I don't know, melancholic Phil, you know, it's subtle, but long-term listeners will definitely hear the difference, right, Phil?
Well, who knows? They might just be like, oh, he sounds his usual self. So
yeah, exactly. It's like, it sounds no different at all. I don't understand what you're talking about. But what are we talking about today, Phil?
Well, we have the chapter approved 2021 to talk about, or what is more likely to be revealed to be 2020 version 2, and also the FAQ updates and erratas to go through as well.
I mean, there is a lot of updates and erratas within those FAQs, so we'll probably just stick to like the main rule books and then, you know, pick out some interesting bits that have been floating around. Unless, of course, you were expecting us to address every single one of those erratas and FAQs.
No, I was planning on just doing the core rule book stuff, but as you say, there are a couple of sort of extras that might be a bit more pertinent to, like, you know, fixing broken combos. You know, Drakari got a couple of fixes. Well deserved, I would say. Yeah.
Like that. No, there's some good stuff in there, which we'll get to after this 5-star review.
Peter!
Oh, hello, Dad.
What are you doing in here, son?
Oh,
what have I told you about wasting your time with these little plastic figurines?
It's not a waste of time, I like it.
How dare you talk back to me, Peter? It's about time you grew up.
I don't want to grow up. Oh, man, maybe there's something on the radio. Yeah, this is nicer.
Peter!
What's that?
That's right, it's me, the ghost of a award-winning TV and radio presenter, Jeremy Beadle.
Jeremy Beadle?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Now, let me tell you here, Sonny, my dad was always telling me to grow up, and I never did. And look how successful I was. So ignore him, Peter, and keep playing with that little plastic crack. And while you're at it, listen to the Lookout Sir podcast, which right now, it's time for the 5-star review.
Wow, thanks, Jeremy.
Who are you talking to with there, son?
Jeremy Beadle.
What? No!
This week's 5-star review comes from where, Phil?
Is it Apple Podcasts of Great Britain?
No, Phil, not
Ooh.
at all.
Ooh.
It is Apple Podcasts of United States of America.
The Americas. Amazing.
The Americas. We do well, Phil, in the Americas. That's a lie. We don't do that well in the Americas at all. I mean, maybe we do. I mean, maybe we're improving.
Are we the 40k English podcast version of the Beatles? Have we cracked America?
I don't think so. No, I imagine there are other, you know, podcasts of British origins that are far more popular within the confines of the many places that make up the United States.
Well, the Americans should sort that out then.
Well, it's because we don't do enough ITC talk. That's the problem.
Oh, well.
I broadly assume. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe all the American podcast fans enjoy the show because, we don't massively get into that all that often. A nice break from the norm in that sense.
Well, exactly. That's what they want.
Well, seemingly so, or in fact, not at all, because actually, as I say, we don't tend to do that well in America. But, that's not that I mind. I'm happy with whatever audience we have in whatever capacity they are available to us. At the end of the day, I love all my fans. Fans is a ridiculous terminology. I love all my listeners equally, Phil.
No,
don't you?
Enough. Well, yes, yeah.
Exactly. So wherever you are in the world, thank you so much for listening. And obviously, to all of our North American listeners, thank you very much, especially. I mean, ultimately, I don't want to come across like I don't appreciate you. It's not intended that way. It's one of those weird British sarcastic issues that we have that we're not very good at, expressing either, excitement nor disappointment. We just exist in a constant state of neutrality or general sarcasm. I don't know which. What do you reckon, Phil?
I was going to go with empty hollowness.
Yes, that's true. Certainly you are empty and hollow after what's gone on with you.
Currently,
there's nothing left in you.
Yes, no, exactly. I'm drained.
You've been drinking plenty of water, right, Phil?
I have been, yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. You want to stay very well hydrated under the circumstances. On the topic of being well hydrated, this week's 5-star review has nothing to do with hydration. But it comes from an individual by the name of Biffomatic from United States of America. Biffomatic. Do you imagine, Phil, that is in some way a reference to Back to the Future?
I'd hope so, yeah.
Quite possibly, right? Do you think this is one of the future incarnations of Biff?
Yeah, well, he's turned into a robot.
Well, potentially. Was Biff a robot at one point? I seem to remember one of Biff's kids was robot-esque at one point in one of the Back to Future continuities.
Yeah, well, no, maybe this is like an even further future version where descendants of robots. We just never saw it in the movies.
There you go. Maybe it's become one of the AI systems powering Twitter.
Yes.
Or mining cryptocurrency.
More likely.
More likely. I mean, that's what all the world's computers are doing right now. And good thing too. God bless it, say. Anyway, 5 stars reads this review. That is literally what it says. 5 stars with an exclamation mark, preceded by 5 little stars, as is a prerequisite of our 5-star review. It's a very short review, so, I don't know necessarily how I'm going to attempt to pad this out in my usual kind of way. But it says, came for the sky serpent, stayed for the dry humor, which I assume is American for humor. Ha 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 ha. Language differences. Anyway, came for the sky serpent. So presumably a fan of Paulie's, which is nice because, you didn't think that Paulie episode went that well, did you, Phil?
Well, I wouldn't go that way. It's it was very much for Paulie and Dancho, and I was just on the sidelines.
It's like the old days, isn't it? When Joe used to be here.
I know. It did give me PTSD, give me flashbacks.
I'll tell you what about Paulie, though, right? What I love about Paulie, he's so passionate about Drukhari. It's almost painful, isn't it? Because I remember when we were doing that episode, there was so much he wanted us to say and so much he wanted to go over. And I was like, mate, we've been recording for 3 hours. We really don't need to keep going anymore, do we? And he's like, well, no, hang on, just one more thing. I was like, flipping heck. How much is there to possibly talk about?
That's like me on a Krieg episode. It's like, there's more I can say.
There's more you can say. That is true. I think, over the course of 89 episodes, I feel like you've addressed the greater majority of the Krieg-related fun.
There might be some more stuff in this new FAQ episode, though.
Oh, you're gonna shoehorn that in, are you? The fact that Death Rider command squads are actually an elite now.
Well, that is a thing. Yeah,
that is a thing. What was I going to say? But no, Paulie's a good lad, and obviously he has so much to say about Drukhari. He does so on his own podcast, the Real Space Raiders. So obviously it's cool that Biffomatic came across. I assume is a listener to Real Space Raiders, as well as obviously Lookout Sir Warhammer 40,000. And thank you very much for coming and checking out the show and for appreciating our dry hummer. We aim to please, but in that whole series of sentiments. Here's Phil to elaborate.
Well, thank you very much, Biffomatic. I mean, neither of us are Drukhari players. I mean, Dan is in a very mild, loose way, a bit like my bowels. But
I feel like that was too much, Phil. Like,
okay.
You know, it was subtle with that. It's fine. You've done it now.
Okay.
Keep going.
Sorry, listeners. Too much content warning. But yeah, we appreciate as a Drukhari player, we probably don't have that much to offer you. Maybe you collect some other armies. Maybe you do just like the dry sense of humor. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Yeah, brilliant. Well done. Keep it up.
The passion and enthusiasm there was very, very well communicated. And yeah, obviously, thank you so much. Biffomatic. It is a delight to receive a 5-star review from such a fine human being as yourself. And if you want to be as exceptional an individual as Biffomatic, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. And at some point in the future, you might find yourself here on this segment, not manifested here within the confines of reality, obviously, but name dropped via your online handle, acronym. What is the terminology for the names that people adopt on the internet?
Well, it used to be internet handle, yeah.
No, internet handle. Okay, fine, I'm right.
Yeah.
Gamer tag.
Gamer tag could be, yeah. I think there's lots of different terms depending on the context of what it is.
Instagram account.
User ID.
User ID. All sorts of things, absolutely. But there you go. Anyway, if you want to be as spectacular as Biffomatic, consider leaving us a 5-star review because it helps us, right? Because at the end of the day, even though we don't make any money out of this, we just kind of get, generally quite excited when we see nice things being said about us because, we have fragile, gentle egos and we need constant validation. Thus, a weekly podcast. Who would have thought?
Are you saying we do the podcast just for the reviews?
Yeah, basically. I do it purely to be showered in praise because outside of this one moment of the week where I get to enjoy, compliments from people I don't know from around the internet, I live, a perpetual life of misery and woe. I just, go around just very, very, very glum.
No, well, good for you.
Exactly. So thank you, everyone, for those 5-star reviews. You are giving my life a sense of meaning. If only that were true. Anyway, moving on now. Transitional noise. Woo! All right, guys, just to let you know, we intended that this segment would be us actually talking about the contents of the Grand Tournament pack, but it diverges really quickly. But to help with that kind of process and not make it too jarring for you, this is me and Phil as well. Say hello, Phil.
Hello.
Hello. This is me and Phil basically explaining, or mostly me with Phil having said hello, that it's not quite what you think it might be based on what you thought the structure was based off the intro. We're now just going to effectively grumble about we don't feel like it's very good value for money. That's about the size of it, right, Phil?
It's the review of the book that would normally go at the end of the main review, but we just did it up front, and then we talk about the rest afterwards. Exactly.
So there you go. So if you don't want to listen to two old men grumbling about, the inflating prices of GW and the associated, poor quality of some of their communications and or associated releases, maybe skip on to the timestamp where we just talk about the contents of the book. But it's up to you. You got this far. Why not carry on?
Exactly.
All right. Phil, I will now hand over to me again, I guess. Or Phil, can you hand over to me? At least then it sort of has a transition that makes sense.
Okay, Dan, take it away.
In this part of the podcast, we will be talking about chapter approved Grand Tournament, the year of our Lord 2021. A tome of some controversy around the interwebs, but essentially an essential document for those of us who enjoy a competitive game of Warhammer 40,000, and in some respects has still actually, in many regards, at least in my limited knowledge and or worldview, become effectively the default way to play Warhammer 40,000, at least in this edition right now. Wouldn't you say so, Phil?
That is how everyone has been playing it. However, when I bought my GT mission pack, I also picked up the open war card decks. because I would like another way of playing. So when we do get a game, we might have to play test some and see what we think of it.
Yeah, no, I'd be very much in favour of that. I think, again, it's interesting, right? Because in terms of the default way of playing 40k, the grand tournament mission structure, in my humble opinion, is possibly one of the more boring ways of approaching a game of 40k. And that was only really exemplified when I played in a tournament last weekend. So I actually did go to a tournament and ran Imperial Knights. And this was before the changes for this GT 2021 pack came into effect. And effectively, I suffered a number of setbacks as a result of how the secondaries were structured as they were in 2020. So seeing the changes that this brings in actually would have potentially been a benefit to me. But even regardless of that, so many weird things occur when you prioritize mobility beyond anything else. Like, the game now is so much about moving stuff around and standing on objectives over and above any other kind of interactions. It becomes much more a game about, again, in a certain kind of way, it becomes much more chessy than anything else. Although even chess is about fundamentally taking pieces away. It's about, destroying your opponent. 40k now is just literally king of the hill, effectively, which is an interesting mechanical change from all the previous editions. And I'm not necessarily sure if chapter approved Grand Tournament 2021 does much, if anything, to massively address that problem overall, even if the secondary changes that they've made, which we'll get into in a moment, have a positive impact on certain armies. I do feel like certain armies are going to have more of a moment in the sun now because of some of the changes to these secondaries, but the core problems will still remain. If you're not able to move quickly and you're not remotely durable, you're still going to struggle in 9th edition.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. What I liked about older editions, especially older versions of chapter approved from 8th edition, is there's a lot of variety of missions. There's a lot of different ways of winning. And yeah, sometimes it would come down to, a nail biter at the last turn. And the missions were very varied to the point where you had to create an army that was very versatile. Now it seems like you create an army that does one particular thing very well, and you sort of hone in on that, and you sort of tailor your army already to basically 2 secondaries pretty much, and then you might base your last secondary off of your opponent, or you would try and tailor your entire army based on preset set of secondaries. So as you say, if you're at a tournament and you're playing 5 games, okay, I'll ask you this: how many of the same secondaries did you take in every single game versus how many did you actually swap out?
So I played 3 games. My army was built around the idea that I would have deploy scramblers, as it used to be called. So I took that every game, and I very often took something that, rewarded my relative mobility, as being Imperial Knights afforded me a good level of movement. So it was usually either engaged it was almost consistently engaged on all fronts. And then the third one would really depend on my opponent. And it would usually be one of the killy ones. So it would be like assassinate or bring it down or something like that. But yeah, it was very formulaic in terms of how the army was built. Which again is a bit.
Well, because the thing is, the missions are effectively all the same, but they just have different deployment maps and layout of objectives. But fundamentally, the actual mission structure is exactly the same. The one difference between all of them is the secondaries, because you get a bonus secondary, but you don't have to take it. So ultimately, that's the real difference between those missions in comparison to previous years, where the missions were like way different.
Yeah, Here's the thing. I don't mind them not changing the missions because I think it is good to have a consistency. But the thing I used to like about old chapter approved books when they were, kind of like mini codexes was they were really great kind of tomes that addressed lots of current day issues with the game. They were never considered to be like permanent documents. They were always, for their place in time. So we had chapter approved 2018 or 2017. I can't remember which year it was they did it. I think it might have been 2017, in which they put in new stratagems for all the armies that hadn't codexes yet. They gave them stratagem and a relic and a warlord trait, and they were like, there you go, there's some stuff just to give you some viability. In chapter approved 2018, I believe that's when they introduced the Sisters of Battle index.
Yeah, I think that was right.
Yeah, when it went into there, and they added loads of cool stuff with that. They also, in chapter approved 2017, if I remember correctly, had rules for making your own land raiders, which was, only intended for narrative or open play. But again, like really interesting extra stuff just to give us more creative, more interesting things. Whereas this is very much, you get the core rulebook with a few tweaks and changes. One thing as well I want to address as well, because I really want to get this out of the way at the start, because I want it to kind of feature relatively prominently within our feedback. This book is another example of Warhammer community advertising faux pas, shall we say. This book was bizarrely promoted initially. So one of the things I would say about Chapter Approved 2021 or Chapter Approved Grand Tournament 2021 is a lot of us said at the time that it came out of nowhere. It was like, wow, okay, God. Because towards the, the end of May, Games Workshop had loads and loads and loads of releases, loads of, Space Marine stuff, loads of, what was it towards the end? AdMech stuff, just loads of stuff, right? And this book kind of slipped in on their Sunday article, and they're like, oh, we're going to put this out. And it did feel a little bit underwhelming. And then they kind of hit us with the marketing spiel where they were going, oh, it's going to contain all this incredible content. It's going to have loads of stuff in it. And they put up pictures of Chapter Approved Grand Tournament 2021 appearing as a book, as it was, or rather a spiral-bound book as it was previously. And none of that's turned out to be true, right? Like, I mean, as a product, this isn't, in a lot of respects, what we were sold. And that is something that, I think, again, we have to say that it is a rather disappointing situation where Warhammer community have so consistently across the span of the last year mucked up the communications of these products, either through using the wrong images, either from overhyping. At what point do we as a community, or rather as a group of consumers, start to look upon the behavior of Warhammer community more negatively? Because at this moment in time, that I feel like they're still riding on the whole, yeah, it's Games Workshop, come on, give them a break type of vibe. And that's cool and that's right because, at the end of the day, it is a hobby and all this other stuff. But I do feel like they're skating on thin ice with this stuff, because this is getting to the point where it's like, come on, guys, like, really? Like, you put out an image of a product and that's not the product you've sold us. In literal terms, like, you charged us £25 for a book that we were used to having in a certain type of way because of how all previous chapter approves have been supplied. And this isn't this isn't the same formatting. It's not the same spiral bound book, which makes it far less useful as a gaming aid. It's much more difficult. And at the end of the day, the only real core difference in this book is that it features a bunch of FAQ updates that they released for free in January, and a few additional changes to the secondaries that they didn't change with the aforementioned FAQ. So this is the thing. As a release, it's a pretty bad release, right? Like, I think they've really botched this. But I mean, what's your perspective?
No, you are kind of completely right on this. It's a bit of a sloppy mess. I've seen there's been lots of complaints online. I've seen people trying to do a little campaign to complain to Games Workshop via their complaints page on their website. It's like, yeah, I filled that out because one of the reasons I bought this was partly for the podcast, but also it's like, okay, let's just get it for the new year, but mostly it was for the podcast. But it's like, oh, okay, it said it was spiral bound, cool. That was like one of the biggest praises I think we both had for chapter approved as a concept. It's like, oh my god, they've made this really practical for actually gaming. And then when it turns up and it's not that, you're like, what? And I know I can see some people just being like, oh, what are you getting hung up about? It's like, yeah, but this is what they said it was going to be. Like they didn't change. They didn't say, sorry, the images aren't correct. They haven't, made any changes. What they have done since is update the images to be the correct ones, which is at least something. When there was one article promoting chapter approved, they said there's loads of new cool content, but as you said, it's really just changes to the secondaries, which is minor, but okay, that's fine. If it had this, to me, should be the definitive book for your rules when playing 40k, as you say, that default match play game, because you want those missions. And it's like, so everything in here should be correct for the year. And it's like, to me, all the, and we'll go through it when we do the erratas and FAQs, there was a huge number of changes in there. They aren't in here, which is like the biggest own goal they could make. And it's like, I would understand, I can sort of understand it due to lead times and printing and stuff. But it's like, those should go hand in hand. They should have a cutoff deadline of, these are the rules for the year. Here you go. And then when there's an FAQ and errata for this document, because people have then questioned some of the things in it, such as the new wording of the secondaries, then that comes out as a digital release. But for them to make a conscious effort of, these are going to be the new rules that we're playing 40k for the year, with all these rare rules being added in, and then to not add them to the book that you're buying for the year just seems really puzzling.
Yeah, it's a baffling set of decisions, and I wanted to use very specific language in terms of, or at least I tried to use very specific language in terms of voicing my concerns. I'm not here to bash them. I'm not here to suggest that we as a community need to negatively respond to this. What I am saying is that this isn't good, and it's off the back of a series of blunders in terms of poor communications and misleading advertising, right? And that's the problem. We've had one too many instances this year and last of Games Workshop taking liberties with how they promote their products. And is this as egregious to me as some of the Warzone sector imperialist books or whatever they were, not books but box sets? Is this as egregious as using promotional images that suggests I'm getting X amount of value when in fact I was getting far less? I would say no, right? I think in the pecking order of GW Warhammer community blunders, I think using old images to depict a box set that doesn't contain the contents that you're advertising is a much bigger mistake than this. But that doesn't mean that this isn't a mistake. And this is off the back of the 40k app and the mistakes that were made with that. I could rattle off a load of stuff that we all remember from the span of the last 12 months. But the point is really, really, really need to up your game with this, because I'm curious how long they can dine out on the goodwill, because I'm getting to a point now where I read Warhammer community articles and I don't trust them. I just immediately go, I wonder what's wrong about that. Like they're doing all the Gaunt's Ghost promo pieces at the minute. I'm waiting to discover that, it's not what we said it was. It's, you only get Gaunt and then the rest of them you have to buy individually. Or, I just don't know. I don't know what it's going to turn into, and it turns into something. And, you know, at the end of the day, I appreciate the lead times. I appreciate all of the things that are complicated about this, because I'm not pretending it's not complicated. And I understand that COVID doesn't help them either, that they have to work remotely. I'm sure the reason why this book isn't spiral bound is because they probably had to scramble at the last minute to ship it off to someone else who didn't have the capacity to do it, right?
Yeah.
I get it. But just be honest with us about it, right?
Yeah.
That's all we ask.
Yeah, that's totally it. And I think the other thing is that was disappointing is the missions haven't changed. And as you said, I think there's either two reasons for that. Is one of them is because they're confident that the missions are great and that just for secondaries are the issues that need changing. The other one potentially is because there hasn't been any tournaments or many tournaments. They don't have the data and feedback to actually know which direction to go in to update these missions. And I think either which way they go, I think there would be complaints. If they gave us brand new missions, people would be saying, well, I didn't really get to play with the old ones because of lockdown. And if they've done what they've done now, it's like you're just reprinting the same missions as last time. Oh, great. It's like, where's my new stuff? And I think a lot of this is down to the precedence of how they used to do chapter approved. As you said, they were so good value for money. And when they were like 20 quid back in 8th edition, like every year it was a brand new set of missions. That is the expected standard. So to not do that this year and to not really mention it in that community article is a bit disappointing. And as you said before, it's like not just the missions, you've got loads of other rules, loads of other updates, and it's like, for last year it was like, oh fine, it's just the mission pack for the GT, okay great, but it's like, okay, but there are no other chapter approves to cover those other ways of playing. They're just all mission packs now. So the value for money of what you get now in 9th edition versus what you got in 8th edition is a lot worse. It's a bit rubbish.
I completely agree, Phil. The only reason you need to buy chapter approved Grand Tournament 2021 is for the secondaries. And you can very easily, if you've got a gaming group or whatever, you probably need one copy of this between 4. It's not that difficult to scribble down the secondaries at the start or check one copy. Like if like a TO, it's like if you've got chapter approved 2020, you can just keep that, and for the mission structure, with the exception of what cut off the head or whatever.
There's a couple of missions that were updated in the last FAQ that obviously drastically changed, and I think they're the ones that quite often have stayed the same name. So basically all the secondaries have changed names, bar one, which is Titan Hunter, even though that one has changed. And in addition, there was a couple of that changed in the previous FAQs as well. So if you kept your old one but wanted to use the new secondaries, it's not just the new secondaries that have changed from your old one. It's the ones that also got updated in their older FAQ as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And that's the thing, right? It's like, honestly, if you haven't bought this book yet, the chapter approved 2021, and you own or are a subscriber, to the Warhammer 40,000 app, I honestly can't think of a viable reason why you should spend £25 on these. Because if you're a subscriber to the Warhammer 40,000 app, all your points are updated on there, right? So the field manual is immediately worthless, because if you're already subscribing to the 40k app, all of those points are represented there. And you can obviously build army lists with that and do what you need to do with it, right? Again, I prefer Battlescribe. I would stick with Battlescribe if I were you, but at the end of the day, if you've got the Warhammer 40,000 app, fantastic. It does the good job. I don't think, or at least Battlescribe, as of a couple of days ago, still hadn't updated to include the points changes, because it takes them a little bit longer to go through everything than it does obviously for the 40k guys who get it instantly. But regardless, it's genuinely, like if you're a Warhammer 40,000 subscriber through the app, you don't need this book. Like, it's just or this release. It just it does nothing.
I find the weirdest thing about the because this is chapter approved, but also you do get the points updates, which is a separate little booklet. It's not very helpful. Like, what I would rather have is, if you're going to list out the points for absolutely everything, I'd also appreciate you listing out how much those points have changed from their previous iteration. So all you can do is quickly skim through it and go, okay, this is up by 5 points, this is down by 5 points, because that's really what you care about more often than not, is how those points have been adjusted. And you can't tell that unless you literally sit down with your last version of your FAQ, or your last manual from the previous year, and compare them, which you can do. And I did briefly to double check a couple of things, but it's otherwise you look at it once and then you never need that booklet. It's sort of like a waste of paper. It's like, just make that a digital release. I know they want to monetize it, but I don't know. It's just a bit of a pain. Like, it's like a complete waste of paper just to make people buy this thing for points, which I don't know, just seems like a waste. Like, I'd almost rather it's like, if it's not in the app automatically and you just get a code added into this. Obviously, the fact that it is in the app for free is great. That is cool. But like the actual physical points value thing just seems a bit pointless as a book. I don't know how many people actually really appreciate that.
The thing that's also really hilarious about this thing is that they didn't even go around and like update the artwork in it.
No, I was going to say that. Like, the photos are the same, the layout is the same, like the introductory page copy is exactly the same. They have laid out some of the pages slightly differently in terms of the actual chapter Grand Tournament book. So like the Battle Ready page comes a bit further ahead. And it does have a couple more pages of the rare rules at the end, but as I mentioned, it doesn't have any of the new ones.
It's just, again, it's literally minimum effort on their behalf. And don't get me wrong, like, should they have to go out of their way to just change everything for the sake of changing it? No. I mean, at the end of the day, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But then that becomes the wider point, which is, well, then if the only thing you've changed is the secondaries, why did you need to sell me this? Like, you could have just given it to us as like a, like a flipping one pager or whatever. Because again, right, given the circumstances, speaking as a GW shareholder, they've made enough money, right? Like, it's that thing where they've made enough money throughout the course of the year. Could they have just given us a gimme? If the argument is this was the way it is because COVID and blah blah blah, it's like, okay, cool. So the only thing you changed the secondaries, that's fine. Just give it to us on a PDF. We'd be fine with that. We don't mind a year off if all we're going to get is that. And fair enough, sell us the field manual as a standalone thing. Just give us that. Give us new points in a field manual if that's what you want to do, and give us, and sell that for 15 quid or 10 or tenner, whatever you want to sell it for. But this is, it's just a bridge too far for me. It's like,
I mean, what's
the nuisance?
Because the implication then is, are we to not get new missions next year? Is this match play forever? Will they just tweak missions?
I hope not, because it's so boring.
No, I know, exactly. But that's the puzzle. Obviously, they haven't said. We have to guess why they haven't updated the missions. I assume it's just because there's been no feedback from events. But if they don't update the missions next year, it's like, I would, I pretty much only bought this for the podcast, is my main reason. I certainly won't be buying it next year if it's the exact same thing again with just more tweaked secondaries. That's not what I want from tournaments. It's like, I do want tournaments to be, I loved the idea of every year there's a whole brand new set of missions that you've got to like learn to play. And that was half the challenge of the the tournament scene is learning how the missions work and how best to build your army for it.
Thing is, though, Phil, you talk about tournaments and you talk about the Eternal War tournaments of 8th edition, which was my preference as well. I was never that big into the ITC structure. I thought the Eternal War system of old was a superior system because in tournament structure, it required players to have adaptable strategies to apply to multiple different types of missions. But that's not what this type of competitive play wants. What this type of competitive play wants is you know, a universal standard. They want to be able to make one army so as every game plays more or less the same with very minor amounts of variation. You know, they don't want to be in a situation where the matchup determines the outcome. They want to be in a situation where it's, you know, it's consistently good. Because again, the complaint you always got about the chapter approved 2018 book was the Null Zone mission, the one where you know, because everyone would be like, well, I play Imperial Knights and this mission is terrible for me because, you know, I lose my invuns. And it's like, well, yeah, but then your invuns were incredibly strong back then because you could Iron Bulwark yourself to a 4-up invun and then you could rotate to a 3-up invun. So Games Workshop in a way had created that mission to try and address that and then to stop you from just power playing your way to the top. It was always a case of you had to be conscious of that and you had to weigh up the pros and cons of that decision when you put it into your army. You know, it made you think about the whole event, not just this will be the same game plan game after game after game after game. Now, I can understand why that makes for a more competitive experience, but does it make the game as fun overall? I don't know. I mean, for me, maybe not.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how Frontline Gaming used to do their ITC missions. Obviously, I think I played it in. I don't think I've ever done their version with secondaries, which is effectively what I had. But I always kept in the loop about what they did, and I think they did tweak the secondaries every year. And they released new ones and they got rid of ones that weren't popular, and it was all done by sort of like a public vote with the people that were involved. But I don't think the missions necessarily maybe changed all that much. So maybe this is the equivalent of what that used to be.
So the ITC 2020 pack, which sadly got very, very underutilized because of 2020, was looking like one of the best rules packs they'd ever created, or anyone had ever created, because, yeah, okay, fair enough, it still had the same problems of hold and objective, but because it was hold one, hold more, it became kind of a sideline, but then also because they gave you kill one, kill more, that is sort of untapped that potential within your army. So though you wouldn't necessarily be as good as holding objectives, you might have been better at killing stuff, and then that would kind of be okay. Plus, also, it was the only rule pack that ever addressed the deployment step the way it should be. Because again, that's painful not to see in here, is the missions are still you go, I go, you go, I go, you go, I go, and then I roll, and then if I win, I have to go first. By the way, is that actually stated in these missions?
Yes, I believe so. Yes, the update of you must go first is in there. The other update on every single mission is they talk about the update to the primary objective, how the person going second scores in their final turn. So that's on every single page. That's basically the main update.
So this is all the stuff that was added earlier in the year. But look, I mean, I think what we should do, Phil, because I feel like we've kind of gone off on a little bit of a tangent here. So for the sake of podcast continuity, I reckon we now break this into another segment where we basically then actually talk about what's in this book, and we just flag this as general impressions, as it were, because essentially, you know, for anyone out there who wanted to listen to us talk about what's actually in the book, they can go to that, which will appear after this. but we wanted just to sort of get off general thoughts out there. So this kind of just developed into that. So I feel like it probably can just be its own segment, right? But based on that, what are your closing thoughts on it as a release?
It is. I was just trying to think of something sarcastic to say. It's just not good. I understand, and I can hazard some guesses to why it is what it is, the way it's been sold, the way it's been printed, the way it hasn't been updated, but ultimately is the lowest value for money item they've probably ever made. It's probably the most disappointing chapter approved that's ever come out. Yes, I would almost say to most people, if you don't play in tournaments, and if you're just doing it as a casual gamer, I would, you probably bought it already or you've not bought it, but I would suggest not buying it. Basically, it is 2 thumbs down.
2 thumbs down. Yeah, look, man, Games Workshop, I love you. I make a podcast where, at my own expense, I talk about this hobby because I'm passionate about it and I love it. And, it pains me to say it, but yeah, it's such an own goal. It's like, again, I'm concerned because I feel like at the moment Games Workshop continues to chip away at the goodwill that it's generated as a business over the course of 8th edition. I think, the work that Games Workshop achieved with 8th edition, the way that it worked with the community, the way it celebrated the game, the way that it just felt like this kind of communal experience where we were all in it together, kind of expanding it and watching it grow as a system, both in terms of its actual kind of mechanical structure as a game, but also in terms of its broader popularity. It was a really special time to be involved in 40k. 9th edition, either as a result of COVID or as a result of just broader kind of company ethos, is not quite hitting all those same notes. And this is a disappointing, very just underwhelming release. And I hate saying it because, we try especially hard to make sure that this place is a positive experience, and we try very hard to kind of to channel that general kind of positivity towards the hobby, so much so that we've been accused of being quite shilly on occasion for it, although I don't think that's true, because I do think we do tend to be honest about it when we need to. But look, the point is that this is bad, and it really sucks that it's bad, because I didn't want it to be bad. I wanted this to be the definitive book that would really kind of catapult the game of 9th edition into 2021 and beyond. And I was so looking forward to what changes this book could represent for the game. And don't get me wrong, aspects of it have been positive for me in terms of point reductions for my army of choice, and we'll get to that in the next segment. But yeah, look, it's a real shame. It's a real shame. And look, if you haven't already bought it, don't. I cannot state that enough. It ain't worth your money. It's a shame. It pains me to say it, but it's just, don't waste your time. So with that, now that you know it's not worth much, we're going to now go on and talk about what's in it in the next segment. Transitional noise. Woo! All right, now we got all that nonsense out of the way. We're going to now actually talk about the contents of Chapter Approved Grand Tournament 2021. So we hope you enjoyed that impromptu, live edit that you got to be privy to there, where we randomly decided that we'd gone far too off on a tangent in the last segment, where we kind of just gave a general appraisal of the release as a release. And now we're actually going to talk about what's in it. And what's in it isn't actually that much, right, Phil? As we've already kind of indicated, it's a bunch of secondaries and a few other rare rules, right?
Yeah, plus the rule about the super heavy auxiliary detachments that they've squeezed into the Grand Tournament 2021 games page, which basically says if you're taking a super heavy that's of your same sort of sub-faction or faction type as the rest of your army, then you get +2 command points, which if you refer to your detachments, which are only available in the core rulebook. They're not in here. Slightly annoying. I sort of really wish those were in here. It normally costs you 3 CP. So it actually only costs you 1 CP to take a super heavy if it's of the same faction type as the rest of your army.
Yeah, so that's a relatively under-publicized feature. We kind of talked about it very briefly last episode because there was a very bad bit of potato cam doing the rounds that kind of showcased that. So what page is that on, Phil?
That's on page 4.
Page 4, the
bottom,
very beginnings.
Yeah, the bottom of the first column.
There you go, it's under mustering your armies. So that's an important change, though, right? Because ultimately, for those of us who have access to some quite meaningful Lord of Wars, Phil's Baneblade, for example, my Revenant Titan, these are actual things now that you can start to look at and think to yourself, ooh, could I squeeze a Revenant Titan into my army now? No, because it's 1,500 points of, relative underwhelmingness still. But, maybe Wraith Knights or something of that nature start to look quite compelling. Certainly, I don't know. I mean, would it make you reconsider fielding a Baneblade if that's a now new stipulation?
I mean, probably not. They did go down in points a little bit in the new points changes, but ultimately, I think it tends to struggle in the overall missions. The density of terrain is the biggest factor, I think. So probably not. I'm sure I'll bring it out to play because it's just a fun thing to take. But the fact it costs 2 CP, that's a nice bonus, I think. And I think that was the biggest, well, not the biggest, but I think that was a factor to why you didn't take them, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that's really interesting, though, as well, is that obviously the AdMech have become one of the more notable armies that can now partner with Lord of Wars in the form of Imperial Knights. And what's interesting is the fact that Imperial Knights don't presently possess the keywords to be able to benefit from this. So it seems like an update that would have really benefited Imperial Knights being taken alongside AdMech as a Knight of the Cog. But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to do that because they don't share any other keywords with Adeptus Mechanicus other than Imperium. And Imperium is too powerful a keyword to be included in this stipulation. So yeah, that's a bit of a shame, I suppose, because it would have been really nice to be able to throw that in. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting Lord of Wars that you might consider now that they're not costing you 3 CP. I mean, 1 CP for a Lord of War under certain stipulations starts to feel a little less taxing. So there could be some interesting options out there.
Yeah, for sure.
It wouldn't surprise me, though, the amount of times where you might have to explain this to your opponent, because I bet this is one of the most, because it's definitely one of the most unpublicized functions of Chapter Approved 2021. So, I would imagine you turn up to a battle and be like, "Oh, how many CP have you got?" And you go 11. And they're like, "Well, hang on a second, you got a super heavy auxiliary, isn't that free?" "Oh no, not if da 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 da." And then it's like, "Where's that then?" And then if they've taken our previous advice and not bought this book, they might not be able to refer to it anywhere. So there you go. It's earned its £25 of value. Yay for all those people who want to take Baneblades, Wraith Knights, Storm Surges. They're Lords of War, possibly.
I mean, it does feel odd that it's here and not on errata to the actual detachment itself. Like, technically, this is only for matched play, but surely the detachments are for, like, in the advanced rules, which, while yes are also used for match play, but like you can do match play that isn't using the GT mission pack, right? So but technically this benefit only applies to the GT mission pack and not any other mission pack that also uses match play rules, or just when you're doing match play rules that might use other missions, for example.
I'm sorry, Phil, I've gone cross-eyed.
Yes.
Anyway, look, I mean, at the end of the day, fine. I mean, again, I can think of some interesting uses. Maybe it will give me an excuse to rock a Revenant Titan at last. I did buy it.
Just do it.
Well, when I discovered the other day as well about Revenant Titans, for the longest time I thought to myself Revenant Titans weren't that impressive because on their data sheet, the only thing they can do when they fall back is charge. So on their data sheet, it specifically expresses that when they fall back, they can charge. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's ridiculous that you can't shoot when you fall back because Imperial Knights can do it. And then I was checking the Imperial Knight rules and I was like, well, hang on a second here. Imperial Knights don't say they can shoot when they fall back either.
This is something we had the discussion with Phil and Garfield after our rapid fire Wargaming Lookout Showdown because we were like, it doesn't say they can fall back and shoot on their codex anymore. And then after a lot of looking around, it turns out they've moved that rule from the data sheet into the shooting phase rules where they say you can't fall back and shoot unless you're a Titanic keyword.
Yeah. So again, an interesting, weird thing that is kind of like, again, one of the sort of weirder things where it's not expressly said in a way that's quite easily accessible, which again is kind of getting back to some of the problems that they were trying to fix when they created 8th edition over and above what was going on in 7th, where rules were just thrown in weird places. Now see page 4 of Grand Tournament 2021 games, because we have yet another weird rule in the mix that a lot of people will probably miss. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's, it'll be represented in the Warhammer app or Battle Scribe when you enter in your army lists. But that's assuming you even consider a Lord of War as an option based on the fact that it's going to cost you 3 CP to do it. And some people find that quite weird. Plus also there's that whole weird thing with super heavy auxiliary detachments not gaining benefits of things as well, right? That's a whole another thing, right?
Yeah, so they don't get the regimental chapter ability, basically.
Yeah.
I think there is a way for Guard via the Psychic Awakening stratagem, basically giving it a tank ace, which then gives it the regiment ability. Yeah, because the Supreme Command detachment doesn't exist. Oh no, there's the super heavy detachment. I think is the only way you can actually do it, because if you take 3 super heavies, they all get the regiment or chapter ability, but that's the only way of doing it as far as I'm aware. Otherwise,
so it becomes weird with regards to, again, Knights of the Cog, because you take them but they can't gain the benefit of being a House Raven, but then they couldn't get that anyway because auxiliary detachments in the Imperial Knight Codex had the same stipulation. But it's just weird. It's a weird thing, but hey, there you go, something extra to consider should you desire to take advantage of it. Should we talk about the secondaries, Phil? Because that's the thing that everyone knows is a thing. So, as is always the way, there are different types of secondary. There is battlefield supremacy, which essentially is being places. No mercy, no respite, which is essentially the killing of things. Shadow operations, which is doing dastardly deeds to outwit and outmaneuver your enemy. Then you have purge the enemy, which is yet more killing of things, and Warpcraft, which is using psychic powers to achieve benefits. So we'll start with battlefield supremacy. Phil, why don't you take it from the top with engaged on all the fronts?
Well, engaged on all fronts is exactly the same as the last one. It hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed one bit.
The clue is in the fact that the name is the same.
Well, indeed. So essentially, if you don't already know, engage on all fronts essentially rewards you with 2 victory points at the end of your turn if you have a model in 3 out of the 4 table quarters. However, should you have a model in all 4 table quarters and not within 6 of the center as well, because that's an important stipulation that many forget, then you would be rewarded with 3 victory points at the end of your turn. Oh, a pretty consistent staple, I would say, right?
Yeah,
most people like a bit of engage on all fronts. Yeah. So then we have behind enemy lines. I will read this one. Score 2 victory points at the end of your turn if one of your units from your army, excluding aircraft, is wholly within the opponent's deployment zone. Score 4 victory points at the end of your turn instead of 2 or more units from your army. Instead, if 2 or more units from your army, excluding aircraft, are wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. So that's a big change, because now you are going to get 2 victory points for having a single unit wholly within your enemy's deployment zone. So before, it was entirely based around having 2 units in your enemy's deployment zone.
The old one was
that's a big change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes that one easier to score, like in a slightly granular fashion. It's not a kind of all or nothing in terms of getting those 4 points.
Yeah, it just, again, I liked what it was before because I think you could build some interesting strategies around that, or it would benefit certain types of things, but it was very difficult to get 2 units wholly within and keep them there consistently. I mean, again, it was one of those secondaries that essentially rewarded you for winning. It's like, I'm winning and I'm winning more. Yay! That kind of vibe.
So the next one's Stranglehold. That replaces Domination. Domination used to be score 3 victory points if you control more than half of the total number of objectives on the battlefield at the end of your turn. It is now score 3 victory points at the end of your turn if you control 3 or more objectives and also control more objective markers than your opponent controls. So this makes it slightly easier to actually score on those 5 and 6 objective. Because before you'd have to have more than half. Now it basically is half. But you also need to make sure your opponent has less than you. So you could have in a 5 objective matchup, you could be on 3 and then make sure your opponent is on 2.
Which would be the case in a 5 objective matchup if you were on 3 anyway. On
a 6, you can have 3 and make sure your opponent is on 2.
Yes.
Whereas before you had to be on 4.
Yeah, I think it's a massive change to that. And you'd be surprised the amount of times I've played people who were playing Domination and they would pick it as a secondary and say, like, I'm going to use Domination. I mean, it happened last weekend at this tournament I did. And you had to sort of point out, but that's over half. And they're like, oh, yeah. It's a bit rubbish, isn't it? It's like, it's not great, is it? Not on a 6 objective map. I think that's a vital and very good change. And what's also actually really interesting with it, and maybe something that maybe people haven't talked about that much about, is that you as an opponent actually still have some interactivity with that as a rule. Because if you know they're going after this, you can, in a 6 objective mission, make plays to control 3 objectives, then to kind of block them from scoring this, which is important. Obviously, in a 5 objective game, you're going to be in that sort of tit for tat situation anyway. But yeah, it's a really, I like the change. I think it's a very, very good change to that one. Moving on to No Mercy, No Respite. I mean, in terms of these ones, there used to be No Mercy, No Respite was where what was broadly categorized as Slay the Warlord used to live, right?
No, that was under not Purge the Enemy. It was Purge the Enemy was where Assassinate and Cut Off the Head used to live.
Cut Off the Head. Okay, fine. So No Mercy, No Respite. So first of these is No Prisoners.
That used to be in their ranks.
Used to be Finn and their ranks. So now it reads, if you select this objective, keep a tally of kill points each time an enemy model is destroyed, unless that model is a vehicle, monster, or character. Add a number of marks to this tally equal to the wounds characteristics of all destroyed models. A model can, if it is resurrected for any reason, potentially have marks added to this tally several times. At the end of the battle, divide your kill points tally by 10 and round down. The result is the number of victory points you score. That is a huge change to that, because it used to be models killed, whereas now it is wounds lost, which is big. Yeah. Because one of the problems that we used to have in the days of yore was you would have, I don't know, a Gene Stealer cult army made up of 100 bodies, numbering roughly 110 wounds, up against the Space Marine army of 30 models numbering 120 wounds. Admittedly, I'm not entirely sure what maths I've just used to get to that, so I'm going to say 40 models rather than 30. But anyway, the point is that you could end up in these ridiculous situations where you were just going to find yourself in really difficult scenarios, whereas now big multi-wound units, especially those that are healing themselves back up again, actually become quite vulnerable to this, because you can constantly be chipping away at them. Now, obviously, they're going to still have a level of durability that's going to make it hard to do, but certainly becomes a really intriguing option, I would say. A
Mm.
nice change.
The other change as well is it excludes vehicles, monsters, and characters, whereas before
Yes.
it didn't. And if you had anything with a wounds tally of 10 or more, it used to score you 10 points. So you'd effectively get, a victory point out of that
Yes.
straight away. So it always used to double down really well with, bring it down. So it's like, yes, I score an extra victory point for no prisoners or thin their ranks, plus all the points for destroying the vehicle via the vehicle thing. So now they've separated those two out completely now. So that's actually a bit of a benefit for tank armies or vehicle heavy lists. So that that is a positive change.
Yeah, no, that's another very good point to make, actually, because the double whammy effect of having a tank heavy army that was bleeding multiple points for the kills was pretty painful. So there you go. Grind them down, Phil. Grind them down.
So that one's the exact same. Do we want to go through the ones that are the same?
We may as well just quickly remind people,
fine.
just in case, because again, it's whatever.
True. It's score 3 victory points at the end of the battle round if more enemy units than friendly units were destroyed that battle round.
It's a good one. It's still as good as it ever was. But here is a new one. To the last. This is replacing While We Stand, We Fight, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so if you select this objective, then before the battle, after you've selected deployment zones, identify which 3 units from your army, excluding those with the fortification battlefield role, have the highest points value, and make a note of them on your army roster. If 2 or more are tied, choose between them. If your army has 3 or fewer units, you instead identify all units in your army. A unit's points value includes the points of all weapons, other war gear, and upgrades it has. You score 5 victory points for each of these units that are on the battlefield at the end of the battle. If a unit splits into several smaller units during the battle, all of those separate units, excluding drone units, must be on the same battlefield at the end of the battle to score 5 victory points. If some of those separate units, excluding drones, are on the battlefield at the end of the battle, but not all of them, you score 3 victory points instead of 5. So, basically what this is doing is stopping combat squadding being overpowered, but also stopping things like squads of Lehman Russes, which were actually really, really good for While We Stand, We Fight, whereas now less so, because as long as you kill one, you will suffer to some losses, which I mean, it's still good, right? I mean,
Yeah, I think especially for Lehman Russes, you can take them in squads of 3. So it's like, if you lose 2 of them, you can still score 3 points per unit. I mean, especially if you're doing 3 squads of 3, and that'd be a bit mad, but viable for sure. But yeah, it does change that effect, and obviously it updated it from the FAQ as well, which changed it from high scoring, wasn't it, model to high scoring unit, which suddenly gave you more options to actually choose from.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's a nice change, and it also means that people can't game it as much as they used to, because there were a lot of very specific strategies with like Dark Angels, with Deathwing now, where they take a 400-point unit, break it down into 2 smaller units, and then you only got the 5 points for it, or rather denied them the 5 points for it if you killed every last person spread out all over the place, and it just got really complicated. Or you came up against things like, I don't know, 9 Vibra cannons or whatever it is for the Elder, all broken down into individual units, and that whole thing got very, very fiddly. Shadow operations, Phil. Raise the banners high. That's the same as it was before, right?
Yep. Yeah, that one hasn't changed.
Fair enough. So if you don't know what raise the banners is, essentially you do an action when you're in control of an objective. You put a banner on it, and then at the end of your next command phase, you score a point depending on how many of said banners are raised high. But Phil, tell us about investigating signals.
Investigate signal. So this one's changed. It used to be investigate sites. Basically, you score 3 victory points each time your army performs the following action. One infantry unit, excluding characters from your army, can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase if it is wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, and no enemy units, excluding aircraft, are wholly within 6 of the center of the battlefield. This action is completed at the end of your turn, provided that the unit attempting it is still wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, and no enemy units, excluding aircraft units, are wholly within 6 inches at the center of the battlefield. Is a very similar one. The extra rules that they've added in is the stipulations at the end. So the fact that you still need to be wholly within the center at the end of your turn, but there can't be any enemy models within 6 at the end of your turn as well, because potentially you could have some heroic interventions into that you've now got to suddenly avoid, which makes actually this one much harder to pull off than it used to be. And I didn't really think this was a particularly popular one anyway, so it's a bit odd that they've made it harder.
I mean, it's a good choice, though, right? If you're going to go for trying to control the center of the board. I think as well, yeah, because you can. Wasn't the points different for investigate signals before, though? Wasn't it that you had to use like a unit multiple times and then you got it? Or am I thinking of the psychic version?
You're thinking of the psychic one, which also is of the center. But yeah, the points are the same: 3 victory points each time you complete an action.
Fair enough. Well, there you go. An option. All right. The next on the list, as I watch Phil get confused by a bug that's walking past him in his shed, is the infamous Retrieve Octarius Data. I mean, what a mouthful, right? I mean, what was wrong with Deploy Scramblers?
I know. I mean, everyone's just going to call it Retrieve Data. I sort of don't really understand why they've... I mean, it's a cool name, but it's not one that people are going to easily remember.
What is an Octarius?
Well, according to the fluff, Octarius is the war zone, which also gets mentioned in Investigate Signal. Right. Interestingly. But it's mostly about collecting servo skulls, which I do like.
Right.
Kind of.
Okay. Couldn't it have just been called Retrieve Servo Skulls then?
Well, maybe. Yeah.
Anyway, right. And the funniest thing is the action itself is just called Retrieve Data. Anyway, if you select this objective, keep a tally of retrieved data points. Add 1 to the tally each time a unit from your army successfully completes the following action during the battle. Retrieve data action. 1 infantry unit, excluding character units from your army, can start to perform this action at the end of the movement phase. If it is wholly within a table quarter that has not had a servo skull retrieved by your army, wow, that is weirdly put together. Anyway, and it's more than 6 inches away from any other table quarter, this action is completed at the end of your turn, provided the unit attempting is still within the same table quarter. If this action is successfully completed, the table quarter is said to have had a servo skull retrieved by your army. The end of the battle, score 4 victory points. If your retrieved data tally is 2, score 8. And if your retrieved data tally is 3, score 12. If your retreat, the point is, if you do it once, you don't get nothing. If you do it twice, you get 4. If you do it 3 times, you get 12.
8. And then if you do it 4 times, you get 12.
God, they wrote that in such a ridiculous way. Fine. The point is score victory point if you treat, 4, 8, 12. Lovely. Flipping heck. Right, so you have to do it 4 times to get 12. But the good news about it now is it's not an all or nothing. So before it was retrieving Octavius data or whatever, they just said you used to get 10 victory points if you did it 3 times. Now you get up to 12, which is greater than what it was before, but you need to perform that action 4 times. Truth be told, that might be quite difficult to do, especially when spread out over table quarters, but at least if you do it 3 times still, you get 8. So, yeah, nicer, better, I think.
Well, the other main change is before it used to not be table quarters. It
Correct,
used to be
yes, that's another major
within your deployment zone, in your opponent's deployment zone, and outside of 6 inches of either person's deployment zone. Whereas now it's just gone back to table quarters, and it's like you've already got other things that do table quarters, like engage on all fronts. I really like deploy scramblers that had a sort of unique sort of mechanic in terms of it not being table quarters. So yeah, personally it's gone a bit more boring because it's table quarters, but I do like the progressive element of it, even though they've made that progressive element harder to get the maximum points on.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's the thing, though, isn't it? If you go and engage on all fronts, retrieving the Octavius data is a natural synergy with that depending on how you're doing it, though, obviously. Well, there you go. Deploy teleport homers, Phil?
Yeah, so that's actually changed. It used to be teleport homers. So you can now deploy teleport homers. So if you select this objective, then units from your army can perform the following action. Deploy teleport homer. One infantry or biker, so biker's new, unit from your army can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase if it is wholly within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. So it doesn't have to be within the deployment zone, which is another change. The action is completed at the end of your next command phase, provided the unit attempting it is still wholly within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone. Each time a unit from your army successfully completes this action, you score 2 points. And then it says in brackets, you score 4 victory points instead if the unit completed this action while wholly within the opponent's deployment zone. So it used to be you had to be in the deployment zone and you got 4 victory points. But now you can be slightly outside of the deployment zone and get 2 points.
I mean, that's a nice change to that, actually. And in a way, it sort of fulfills a function that I suppose Deploy Scramblers almost did, which is that, you can, if you're able to, you can obviously trigger this turn 1 to get 2, and then maybe you could find yourself in a situation where you're in your opponent's deployment zone, hidden out of line of sight somehow, scoring, 4 consecutively for turn after turn after turn. What unit it is that is doing that, I don't necessarily know. I mean, what's interesting about this is it's a biker or infantry model that can be a character. So you could potentially have some kind of, character on a bike that's doing this, although you'd be sinking a lot of points into that functionality. So you just need some highly mobile character. Or potentially things like assassins could be quite good for this. So if you were looking at the Coluxus assassin that you can only hit on 6s, having that guy running around just going, hey, I'm deploying teleport homers. Yay.
Oh, that's true. A very odd job for him to be doing. What I like is, I don't know if it's like a weird in-joke, but there's like a little narrative being told on this one, because the original teleport homer says Vanguard forces deployed the teleport homers behind enemy lines, but they're damaged and you've got to fix them. Whereas this one says you are the Vanguard force and you're deploying them. So it's like you're going back in time in some weird, reverse movie.
There you go. It's like Rogue One versus New Hope.
Yes.
There you go. Purge the Enemy is next, and probably one of the more consistent secondaries in Assassination. We love a character in 9th edition 40k, and as a result, Assassination is actually quite a good secondary for the most part. Still retains the same name as before, but there is actually a difference. Well,
a slight change. It used to be Assassinate. Now it's Assassination.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Assassination as opposed to Assassinate. But anyway, you score 3 victory points for every character that you slay. But if that character happens to be your enemy's warlord, you gain 1 additional victory point. So if you are up against a situation where your opponent has 4 characters, there are 13 potential points on the table as opposed to merely 12. But it does mean that you potentially could.
If you want
not 12, sorry.
If you're going to max out at 15, you have to kill the same amount of characters, whether one is a warlord or not. It doesn't actually matter. It only matters if you don't score max points.
Exactly, but you can't always assume that you're going to max out everything, right? So having the warlord intrinsically have value is the right decision in my opinion. Like again, it makes the warlord and their death mildly valuable. It's not going to be. It's not anything like what it used to be, but it's mildly valuable.
No, yeah. So this also replaces cut off the head. So cut off head is now no longer in here, and they've just given you 1 extra victory point for killing your warlord. I really think it should be at least 2, if not. I would, hazard to make it even 3. Make it a bit more of a real thing to go for. 1 extra.
You're high rolling this, Phil.
Well, exactly. If as I said, if you're going to aim high and try and get max points, it makes 0 difference whether it's the warlord or not that you kill, which means this isn't a very good change to the secondary.
Well, I mean, again,
whereas if you kill the warlord, which is should be the hardest thing to kill, and it means you can do it you can max out by killing 1 less character. That makes Assassinate better, I would say.
Yeah, but I think the problem they've got to try and deal with is they don't want to make it that much better. Because if you rewarded people 3 points for killing a warlord, and you ended up in a situation where most armies comprise of 3 characters, Assassinate is just going to over-index massively in everyone's picks because it's always going to be an easy option. And I think they're trying not to make options easy. At the end of the day, if you've got 4 characters, this is a nice option, but it's not a guaranteed 15. Whereas if it could be a 15 in most circumstances, I feel like that's too much. Because if you gave it 3, that would be 15, wouldn't it? Because the 3 for each character, 4 characters.
3,
and then
6, 9, 10, 11, 12. No, so you still wouldn't max out killing 3 characters.
In the 3 character example, yeah, you wouldn't max it out. But again, if there's 4 characters, I don't know. All I'm saying is like, I think giving 3 victory points on top of the fact, because you still killed the character.
3 is a lot. I would go 2 personally. 3 is generous. 2, I think, makes it feel at least a bit more valuable.
You'd like a little charity in your 25 quid book, right? You want a little bit of a little something.
Yes, no, exactly. So weirdly, the next one is Titan Hunter. It's the same name as before, but it is completely different. So before,
good thing too, I'd say.
Well, yeah, it's a bit weird that they've not been consistent in this with their naming logic, because this one hasn't changed. But before it used to be 10 victory points if you killed 1 Titanic unit, 2 got you 12, 3 got you 15. You now score just 4 at the end of your battle round for killing 1, 9 for killing 2, or 15 for killing 3 Titanic keyword models. So yeah, really good for night players.
Yeah, it really is. Really, really is. I definitely lost 1 game last weekend because of the value of Titan Hunter. The fact that my opponent killed 1 knight and then was immediately rewarded with 10 points completely skewed the game at that point, and it was so hard for me to kind of close that gap.
I mean, 4 feels quite low, but if you're just pretty much a knight army and you're on average, you're able to lose 2 knights a game, 9 points, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, it's a welcome change for and again adds some viability to knights, especially alongside some of the other changes that are in there. So I like it. I think it's the right decision. There's some broader points that I'll make at the end, but yeah, it's all right. It's good. I like it. And then bring it down is exactly the same as it was before, right? Well, not exactly the same as it was before. The FAQ version of it.
It's the FAQ version of it, where it's effectively 1 point less for all your vehicles than it used to be.
Yeah, so one point for a 10 or less wound vehicle or monster, 2 for 11 plus, and then 3 for 20 plus. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, again, a sensible decision. Definitely adds a lot more viability to certain types of army, unless, of course, you're going to still be spamming vehicles like crazy, much like the army I'm going to be using at this weekend's tournament, Phil, where I'm taking 8 tanks.
Ooh.
I know, going Mekdar, bringing it back. Gotta love those points decreases that I guess we'll talk about in a moment. Warpcraft is probably by far and away one of the most improved of the pools of secondaries. Abhor the Witch is exactly as it was prior to the FAQ, which is that you cannot select the secondary objective if your army includes any psychers, but you score 3 victory points at the end of the battle for each enemy psychic character unit that was destroyed, and 2 victory points for every regular psychic unit that was killed. So still really powerful if you're up against a lot of psychers, but again, it's one of those things where, you know, it has been balanced as a result of the FAQ. Warp Ritual is a... What was that called before Warp Ritual?
Psychic Ritual.
Psychic Ritual, thank you. So this is, if you select this objective, keep a tally of ritual points. Add 1 to the tally each time a unit from your army successfully completes the following action during the battle. Warp Ritual, warp charge free. 1 psychic character unit from your army can attempt to perform this action in your psychic phase if it is within 6 of the center of the battlefield. At the end of the battle, score 3 victory points if your ritual tally is 1, score 7 if the ritual tally is 2, or 12 if the ritual tally is 3. And what's really interesting about this is that multiple characters can do this now, or multiple psychers rather. So it isn't just as it was before, which I believe this is the one where you had to have one character do this over and over and over again. Now you can go in and do it, and it rewards you for doing it once. Not hugely, but not insignificantly either, right?
Yeah, it's a huge improvement by making it progressive, by making different characters able to do it. I still think there's a slight problem with these in terms of just how the rules work around psychic actions, in terms of if you do a psychic action, you can't do any other psychic powers. And normally your psychers are kind of linchpins for your army that want to do other things. So for certain armies like Space Marines, why would you really spend a 100+ point model probably to do nothing but this? I mean, maybe if it scores you 15 points, maybe it's worth it. But I don't know. I've done it once with my psychers for my the astropaths, and it scored me 15 points when it was 15 points, like for the flat one, because my opponent didn't have any psychers to deny it as well, because that's what can also still happen. So yeah, so I think there's some general downsides to the actual mechanics that is why people might not take this as much.
So the psychic actions are interesting because they are performed in the psychic phase, but they don't prevent you from doing anything else, right? You can still charge, shoot, do whatever you want after the fact, right? It's just literally you sacrifice all your psychic powers.
I think that's right,
Yeah, so it's interesting in the sense that you do potentially have some flexibility there, and because of the fact that you can use multiple characters now, it becomes interesting. Like, to use Elder terminology, you're not going to use Eldred Ulfran to do this. That would be bananas. But you might use a Warlock. But, you know, again, you kind of have to see what the kind of situation is. There's 2 problems with this. Problem 1 is you can always roll a double 1. It happens more often than people like to admit. And problem number 2 is that you can still be denied. So even if you roll low, there's a high chance that someone will have a psyker that can stop you from doing this.
Yeah.
So the improvements are justifiable under those circumstances. But at the same time, sorry, I just knocked my microphone there. How rude. At the same time, it's improved certainly, but is it an auto take? No, probably not, because it's hard to guarantee it happening. But, you know, much better than it was before. Pierce the Veil, Phil. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so that's the same one as before. So that is score 8 victory points at the end of your battle if one of the following... if one or more units in your army successfully completes a following psychic action 2 or more times during the battle, or 15 victory points at the end of the battle round. If more units from your army successfully completed the psychic action 4 times during the battle. That's the same as before. So Pierce the Veil psychic action, warp charge value of 4. 1 psychic character unit from your army can attempt to perform this psychic action during your psychic phase if it is within 6 inches of your opponent's deployment edge and more than 6 inches away from enemy models.
Fair enough. Why don't you tell us about psychic interrogation, Phil? Take us home.
Yeah, so psychic interrogation used to be mental interrogation. It's only had a slight tweak to it. So score 3 victory points at the end of your score 3 victory points each time you successfully complete the following psychic action. Psychic interrogation is a psychic action of a warp charge value of 4. One psychic character unit from your army can attempt to perform this psychic action in your psychic phase if it is within 24 inches of any visible enemy character model. It used to be 18 inches. It's now gone up to 24, but you do now need line of sight, which you didn't before. So in one hand, they've made it easier, but in another hand, they've made it harder. Yeah, it's all right, I guess. But you've got to do it against another psyker, so they could deny it. So that's going to be a bummer. But then if they're wasting their denies on this, maybe it's not on. No.
It's any character, not psychic character. You have to be a psychic character.
Sorry. Yeah, that's true.
But your target just needs to be a character.
Yeah, so I always think these ones are good against armies that don't have psykers, and then they would obviously take Abhor the Witch as a counter to you potentially.
Yes.
Yeah. But when it's psyker versus psyker, I think most people tend to ignore all of these.
Yeah, I think the thing is with the the Warpcraft ones, that whole sequence, I think there is some viability there, and they've definitely done a good job here of improving them. I like the overall improvements that I'm seeing here because I think that was necessary. But I do agree that it's still got its problems, but I think you can build around it more now, which is definitely a plus to those who like psykers. I'm trying to think of like psykers that I think would be well suited to these tasks, but I think predominantly you're just going to be looking for relatively cheap sort of throwaway psykers. I don't know, for example, how many points one of those like weird rogue psykers are from Blackstone Fortress, for example. Like maybe something like that might be suited for this, where it's cheap, or your astropaths or warlocks, or cheap psykers that you can get. Some of the Inquisitors are actually relatively cheap as well, I think, relatively so anyway. And then obviously for armies like the Grey Knights, this is all crazy useful. So yeah, for armies like Grey Knights and Thousand Suns, this is a nice win-win. And then for other armies that have access to psykers, it's obviously still viable, just different. Yeah. So there you go. That's the second.
I was going to say that there are some like interesting combos where obviously you could take like Psychic Ritual plus the other one, which is Investigate Signals now. So you're both doing 2 objectives in that 6 inches center of the board. And then
you can't do a psychic power if you're doing that action, though.
Oh no! Well, no, obviously different units. So you've got to take a lot of your army to go. I'm just going to hold this point to do all my secondaries.
Yeah.
Plus a ring around that 6 inches, which is then doing something like engage on all fronts, for example. Might be the way to do those things. So you could like double down on those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean that certainly sounds viable, I guess. I mean, again, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, what I want to get into is the general vibes with the secondaries overall. Because I think, again, to me, even though it's great that they have addressed the secondary system in so much as they have sought to balance it against what has been strongly performing, obviously they've looked at the stuff that's been doing really well and changed it. I think it doesn't address some of the problems I still have with it, which is that it is bewilderingly complicated for new players still. Like the number of points that you're rewarded, when you're rewarded them, what you have to do to get them. It's still got all the same problems it had at its conception, which is some stuff you get at the start of your command phase, some stuff you get at the end of your turn. Some stuff gives you 3 points, some stuff gives you 2 points, some stuff gives you 9 points. It's like, I get it, right? Because the more and more you play it through just simple repetition, you remember this stuff. And I am at that point with the secondaries now where I've played this system enough that it's somewhat ingrained in my mind. But this is still mad complicated. I would have loved to have seen some efforts to streamline this, right?
Maybe in terms of like when they happen, like because some, as you say, score on the next command phase, for example, but most tend to be at the end of the turn. So why not just make it consistent to that? Or you say that your opponent always gets a turn of trying to stop you from doing it, so make them all in the command phase. I know what you mean. There's a lot of similarities, and there's a bunch to do with doing something in the center of the board. There's no real diversity of games mechanics, and I'm sure it would potentially make it harder, but it would be more interesting to see. Like there's nothing here that is like hard to do but would actually allow me to steal victory points off my opponent instead of me just gaining them, for example. Like ones that can deny my opponent scoring. It's all relatively the same thing, and they're thematic to a point, but it would have been great if they'd have given us a bunch more new ones as well. Like they could have given us one extra for each one, or one extra per faction that hasn't got a codex yet, for example, to help address that balance that the new codexes have faction specific ones, and the ones that don't have the 9th edition codexes are missing that kind of balancing aspect that this isn't addressing. And as you mentioned earlier, like they used to do that with the 8th edition ones. The ones that didn't have relics got relics, for example, even if it's just temporarily. Like that would have been useful.
Yeah, I think, so there's a bunch of stuff to kind of unpack there, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right, mate. It would have been nice if we had some faction-specific secondaries that were being granted to armies that don't already have them. Noting that Games Workshop, by all accounts, has some idea of what these new secondaries are going to be for a number of factions, so it probably couldn't have been too ridiculous for them to have called them what they will be called when they come in the future and give us a version of it, and then maybe when the codex drops, it's a slightly updated version of that. But yeah, something like that would have been appreciated and given us a reason to care about this book a bit more. And yeah, just stuff to streamline this for people. This is the thing, exactly as you said, Phil. I'm not really doing much in the way of interacting with my opponent. I'm kind of just playing my own game. And that's the thing, it's not a tactical back and forth between two players. It's just, I'm just playing my strategy and you're playing your strategy. And it's going to come down to who is better at performing their overarching kind of strategy for accumulating the most points. And, that isn't necessarily an interesting tactical interaction between two players. It's just, it's just a bit meh. And then, yeah, I just wish there was a way that they could conceivably make this more streamlined for people. I just think the way it is at the moment is just too cumbersome. And again, it's all the different variables and the way every one of these secondaries is his own weird little mini game. And also the other thing as well is that I could pick the wrong secondary, right? I could just make a mistake. So again, I'll give you another example from the tournament I played last weekend. I chose Titan Hunters because my opponent had one of those grav tanks from Forge World, the big one, the Astraeus.
The Astraeus, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so he had a bunch of a bunch of Dreadnoughts and an Astraeus, and it was all Iron Hands. And he was using all the Iron Hand buffs to stop the Astraeus from getting blown up. But early game, I thought to myself, well, I've got to deal with that Astraeus, so I chose Titan Hunter. And then the way the game played out, I actually, in the end, killed all his Dreadnoughts and grinded him down every turn. So at the end of the game, I lost, even though I was probably performing quite well because of a poor secondary decision. So even like, I don't know, some kind of like stratagem where I can change my, change my secondary, but it has an impact on what that secondary rewards me, or something, something that punishes me for making a mistake, but doesn't punish me to the extent that I've got that I've got no way of turning it around. Because that's the thing. Like, I understand picking secondaries is a skill in and of itself, but it's one of the things I really liked about the Maelstrom system is that, I can do things to manipulate what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, you can basically get a bit of a do-over and repick what you're doing. And we talked about, I think after that episode, or even on that episode, maybe talking about that secondary should have a similar mechanic where a universal stratagem in the core rulebook that allows you to, or I guess it would be within the GT pack in theory, that, even if it's like 3 or 4 CP, it allows you to like repick like after a turn or whenever you want, but it resets, whatever one you got rid of, you lose those points. You then start from afresh at getting your new thing. So if you do it a couple of turns late, you're going to lose out on points with the especially even now with Titan Hunter, because you need to kill more than one, for example, because there are no ones that you really like just get a flat 15 anymore. So that sort of thing would be really useful. I guess to answer your question about they need streamlining is like, is this really to be catered for new players?
True.
Like,
True.
It shouldn't really be. This is meant to be the top end of, the competitive scene. It needs to be complex for that reason. But the problem is this is advertised as like the default way to play 40k. This is, as you say, it's the match play pickup. You go into your local gaming club, everyone's, or at least a lot of clubs will be playing this. If you just want a random match with someone, the assumption is you're going to be doing a GT mission rather than something narrative or crusade based. And I think because it is pitched like that, you then have this issue of, if new people are getting into the game, then this is sort of way over the head. It's too much to learn. You need a midpoint where you can play some interesting games, maybe still using secondaries that aren't as complicated. Maybe you're just doing 1 secondary or 2 secondaries instead of all 3 of them. My personal preference is that, you actually have to play the mission secondary in addition to whatever other secondaries you're picking, because that makes every single game actually different. Otherwise, you're playing the same game, but on a slightly different deployment layout, and the objectives are in different place. To me, that isn't a different game. You need actual rules to make the mission different.
Yeah, I echo that sentiment, mate. I mean, again, we're a bit weird, right? Because we have a specific version that we kind of like, and I think I just think that's the thing. Am I a bit too old timer? Old man yells at clouds about this kind of stuff. I hope not, but it's one of those things that I just used to feel like the game of old had a certain dynamic vibe to it, a certain feel to it that felt very essentially 40k, because 40k is not the best system out there, right? Like, if you really want a more comprehensive competitive system, there's probably better gaming systems out there for that. But what 40k is uniquely special for what it is, and I worry about how all this stuff is sort of impacting people's sensibilities with the game, because I do feel like this book is informing a lot of people's impressions of what 40k is supposed to be.
It'll be interesting because obviously, so people in America, especially, from what I get the feeling, is that they all played ITC. Like, not to say that's universally the case, but even in the tournament scene, it's all ITC based. They, the assumption that, or the impression that we get in the Great Britons, is that they never really played the Eternal War missions. They didn't like them. They just played the ITC format and the ITC missions and the ITC sort of house rules and erratas when they did them. So I'd be interested to hear from those people what they like and think about this GT mission pack. Because to me, it's like they are the audience that this is being catered towards, rather than people in the UK and maybe elsewhere that didn't really play ITC and used to play those kind of classic GW sort of Eternal War style missions. So yeah, I'll be interested to see for the people that used to play similar sorts of missions and games, is this like a good move? Are they happy with this? Are they happy that it's just the secondaries that are changing rather than the missions?
Yeah. Are you entertained?
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one for sure. I'd definitely be intrigued to hear that feedback from those players and see where their heads are at with it. The other thing that obviously Grand Tournament 2021 has within it is the Minotaurum Field Manual 2021 Mark II. So, I mean, it's probably worth talking about that really quickly. So this is obviously the points changes, lots of point changes for lots of different armies. The broad consensus of it is that they're all sensible adjustments. Basically, if it's really good, it went up in points. And if it wasn't so good, it went down in points. What that has translated into is Space Marines, in my humble opinion, have taken a number of nerfs because the most points efficient stuff for Space Marines has seen increases. So most notably, Chief Apothecaries have gone up significantly. These were essentially auto includes in Space Marine armies prior to these points increases. Now you're going to look at them more, rationally, more reserved. You're not going to just sort of take them as a matter of course. Attack bikes now have become very expensive, or not very expensive, just more expensive, more appropriately pointed, to the point that a multi-melter attack bike now is not one of the most efficient gun platforms in the game. And then beyond that, the plasma interceptors have gone up to an extraordinarily high points cost, to the point that I don't think you're ever going to see anyone run them ever again, or at least not until they get a points reduction. And then the Vanguard vets have had a points increase as well, in terms of not the Vanguard vets themselves in a baseline, but the jump packs and the storm shields. And the stuff that's been reduced for the Marines is the stuff that really was ridiculously overpointed, and still overpointed, really, in my opinions, which is the Storm Speeders, the Land Raiders, the Storm Raven, and the Gladiator tanks have all seen point reductions. So, yeah, we use Marines as an example because we appreciate a lot of people play Marines. But, yeah, I mean, what do you reckon, Phil, with these points changes? Are you mostly happy with them? You haven't seen anything that's made you go, "Core blimey"?
Well, the Death Rider going up in points is the one that has the guard player in me screaming somewhat.
How much have they gone up to?
Well, they were 15 points. They've gone up to 20 points.
Oh, wow.
So
that's huge.
A 5-point increase is massive.
Yeah.
So a command squad was 65. It's now 85. It's like... Yeah, it's like if you run 10 of them, that's a lot of extra points.
Well, it's 50 extra points.
50, which is an infantry squad more. And if I get some people want to run thematic armies and they want to run like 20, 30 of them, that's a huge points cost increase. And I get is like they are good, but the thing is they're not good in combat. They're good at being durable. That's the thing that they're good for. So it's like I sort of understand people's initial pushback, and part of me is like, maybe that points cost is actually meant to now reflect the fact that they could take orders and they couldn't originally, and that was then only FAQ'd later on. So maybe that was an oversight that they didn't realize, and now they're really good at screening because they can just move so quickly. So maybe they've upped the points for that reason. But it's a bit of a shame, because it's like, yeah, if you up them by a couple of points, I'd get it. 5 is like 25%. That's a lot. And guard overall aren't in like the best of states anyway.
It's not a 25% increase, though, is it? Because the increase isn't relevant to what the final place is. It's actually like a 33.3 recurring point increase.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're right, actually.
Yeah. That's huge.
I think the thing is, it feels like it's a penalization because regular guard players have gone, these are good, I'll just take them as a detachment.
Yes.
Whereas Krieg players who play them and need them because they're like a core unit for their army, because a lot of their army rules are now not as good, and the specialist units of the engineers and the Death Riders make up for it. But now regular guard players are like, cool, I'll have that, thanks. So yeah, it's a bit of a, I presume it's a bit of a punishment for that, basically, which not great. I'll take it on the chin. It's, yeah, I only tend to run 10 anyway, so 50-point increase. It's not great. Actually, no, it's more than, no, it's 50 points. Yeah, it's not great.
So for me, I think I can understand why they did it, because of the amount of them that people were potentially, looking to add to guard. But again, it's that thing, isn't it? It's like, I always feel for the guard, because it always seems like they're the ones that get the stiffest kind of like nerf, and yet they're not got anything. It's like literally like, no guard, you can't even have that. It's like, well, oh, come on, guys.
Yeah,
like, what?
it's an odd one, because they didn't really get many decreases anywhere else. It's like the super heavies, the Baneblade chassis ones, went down in points a bit. Pretty much everything stayed the same, and it's like, okay, like the rest of the army isn't super well performing. And again, with the Death Riders, it felt like it was a lot of talk on the internet, but I've yet, maybe it's because events aren't really around yet, haven't seen an army at a tournament rocking 50 horses, for example.
Well, because if you're using official Death Rider models, I mean, unless you're, being a very rich person. A very rich person, or someone of questionable morals, it's not going to be easy to field that army. But I mean, that's the thing. I just think, because it's weird, right? Because as an Elder player, as a Craftworld player, I've been showered in reductions for my best stuff. It's like, oh, the Night Spinner, yeah, that's too many points, we'll reduce that. The Fire Prism, oh yeah, that's too many points, we'll reduce that. Fire Dragons have gone down from a 5-man unit costing 115 points to costing 100 points. It's crazy. It's a squad of 5 fellas, all armed with melter guns that can advance and shoot with no negatives, with movement 7. So they literally, honestly, it's crazy. I'm literally looking at Fire Dragons like, how did this happen? That these guys became 100 points for a unit of 5. Bear in mind, if you take the Exarch with the Fire Pike, you still got to pay 15 points for the Fire Pike. But no one is putting a Fire Pike on that Exarch who's trying to do it competitively, because the thing is with the Fire Pike is yeah, there's some reasons why you might take it, but the way the squad operates is they all have the melter gun. So why not have the Exarch also with a melter gun, not pay the 15 points, and then it performs a function alongside the rest of its squad, but then isn't costing you an extra 15 points. So it's 100 points for this unit. It's got 6 wounds, because Exarchs have 2 wounds, I believe, unless that's changed recently, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't. And it's got 3 up armor saves, ballistic skill 3, can advance and shoot fine. And they've gone, oh yeah, that's 100 points. And you're like, what? How is that 100 points? That's madness. Like, literally, like, if I wanted to take a unit of sisters with 4 melter guns, because I don't even think there's an opportunity to take them with 5 melter guns. But maybe I could give like a fusion-y type pistol to the leader. That would be more points than that. And it's like, again, it's one of those things that there's some weird decisions in Elder, like reductions. But again, it felt like they needed it, but not Fire Dragons. But there we go. Fire Dragons, they're a hot pick. No pun intended.
Good for you that your army saw a boon.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? So the army list that I have written now with all the points reductions, if I was to take this army list a week ago, it would have cost me 2,100 points roughly. Now it's just an even 2,000. So there's I've saved 100 points from one update to the other. That's massive. That's absolutely massive. And a lot of the other good stuff had points reductions as well. So, you know, I mean, Elder really didn't have very many options in 9th edition, so it's good to see these reductions for them. But it's just interesting, the inconsistencies, especially with, again, it's just guard again. It's like, why must you constantly just punish the guard players? Can't you just, you know, it's just crazy.
Throw them a bone.
Yeah, it's just like, just let them have it. It's not like they're winning anything. Don't worry about it. It's like, it's like, who cares? And also, why don't you want Forge World to sell 50 horses, right? Because that's so much money. I mean, if someone's mad enough to do it.
I mean, that's what I said when I first saw it. I was like, it's like Forge World doesn't want to sell models. I mean, obviously that's not a reason to do it, but it's like that. The thing is, they were a good unit, not particularly broken, I would say. But every army has good units that are reasonably well pointed.
Yeah.
That's sort of intrinsic always. So why not just let this one also exist for guard players or for Krieg players? It's like, oh, it's Forge World. No, we're up the points on that. It's like, so for example, the Baneblade super heavies all went down in points, but none of the Forge World stuff went down in points. Like all of their super heavies, they all stayed the same. And it's like, what's the logic behind that? It feels like a lot of the time they're just like, we're not actually trying to balance these things because they're not, you know, that well optimized. So it's a bit like, oh, okay. You just decided that the Forge World stuff is staying at this price and you're not really going to ever update it or change it.
Well, they did make updates in the FAQs though, right? Because they've updated like the Drakari stuff and the some of the other stuff to the Death Guard stuff to reflect their relevant keywords and get their bonuses and other bits and pieces. So they are updating it in FAQs, but yeah, points wise, it sort of is what it is. But yeah. I mean, the most interesting thing to me was certainly amongst the Space Marines, seeing the Gladiators and the Storm Speeders reduced in points. That suggests to me that Games Workshop haven't sold nearly enough of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it before, where the Speeders especially seemed quite expensive for what they were doing. So, and they, they've gone down by, I think, up to 30 points, which is...
I think it's 15 points per... everyone's gone down by 15, I think, 15 or 20.
Yeah, I thought it was different amounts depending on which variant it was.
No, I think they've all just universally dropped the same, as it were. But it was, anyway, regardless of what I think the Gladiators are different depending on the Gladiators, but I think the Storm Speeders all just drop the same.
All right,
but,
okay.
But either way, I mean, again, I do think people will reevaluate Storm Speeders now, but I still don't think they're worth it. I genuinely still struggle to understand why you would take Storm Speeders, because the best version is the Melter version, and it's now slightly less points than free attack bikes, but or maybe it's like 30, 40 points less than free attack bikes, but free attack bikes are still superior in terms of output. And then if you compare it to eliminators are still superior. And then when you start looking at land speeders with multi-melters, I think, are coming close to the same kind of points as an attack bike with a multi-melter now. In fact, I'm going to just quickly check attack bike points, so as my mad statements are based in some kind of truth. So the attack bike is 50 points base, and then if you want to give it a multi-melter, it's 10 points, whereas a land speeder is 60 points base, and for 10 points extra, you can give it a multi-melter. So there's a 10-point difference between a land speeder and a attack bike. There used to be like a 20-point difference between the two. But for that extra 10 points, you gain +1 toughness, +2 wounds, +4 inches of movement. So yeah, it's one of those things where now you might be going, if I was going to be taking attack bikes, I might just start taking land speeders now. But I don't know. Depends what people decide, right? But yeah, there you go. So some point changes happened, as is the way of things. Again, apologies if we went very Space Marine centric there and then obviously went into our own individual specialisms. Nothing much changed with Imperial Knights. I looked at that obviously that didn't really change very much, and none of the other army lists that I'm running at the minute reside outside of sort of Space Marines or Craftworld. So yeah, I didn't really notice any others, but yeah, obviously if you've been negatively impacted, I saw the Tau players getting all uppity because a Riptide was reduced by 1 point, which I did like. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, it seems a bit of an odd one to do, really.
Yeah, it's like perfect, 1 point. Yes, we've nailed it. It's like okay, cool. So now my army list is 1,999 points rather than just 2,000. Great, cool, well done. That was well worth it. But yeah, point changes are point changes. Yeah, there were some shenanigans as well, though, right? Because there were points in there for the Sisters of Battle stuff that isn't out yet, right?
Yes, yeah. Obviously, we would talk about Sisters next week. So it was the war suits, Paragon war suits, for example. Yeah. They're misprinted, so they say they are. I think it was at 240 or 280 points per model. But it's meant to be per squad, but technically that's what it is, and apparently that's what it is also in the codex. I'm sure that'll be errated on day one of release,
or it won't be. That'll be fun, won't it?
Or maybe it won't. I've heard other people talk about the Paragon war suits apparently can ignore damage 1 weapons because it doesn't have a stipulation that you reduce damage by 1 to a minimum of 1. It just says you reduce damage by 1.
Brilliant.
But then they cost 280 points a model, so that's fair enough, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 280 points a model, you fill your boots. I mean, that's a great army list there, though, right? I mean, what a great way to break into 2,000 points of 40k. Just like, yeah, whatever, just free Paragon. Well, not free, obviously. 8, 9 Paragon suits. Yeah, I'm in there. Anyway, how many points is, do we know how many points the character High Lord of Terror is? She may be like 280 sort of level.
Oh, yeah, I didn't look. I haven't seen
something in that ballpark, but there you go. So yeah, they're all as valuable. It's a wonderful time. All right, cool. Well, anyway, that'll do for our thoughts and feelings on Grand Tournament 2021. We're going to move on and talk some FAQ stuff, I guess, and see how that goes for us. Transitional noise. Woo! All right then, everyone. It's the part of the show where we talk about the FAQ, or rather the errata, or the thing that changes things. Right, Phil?
Yeah, this is the thing that actually changes the rules for 2021. But this is the thing that is not in the GT rules, even though it has things like rare rules and erratas anyway, but it's not on there.
Exactly. This is the most important rules update, and it was entirely given to us for free over the interwebs. So there you go. Ironic, perhaps, but whatever. So we may as well just get into it, Phil. So the FAQ is there to address some very specific edge cases and weird instances. So some of this stuff you, as a rational Warhammer 40,000 player, may never encounter in your fun-friendly games because you and your mates might just agree various house rules and various things. Like the first of the things we're going to talk about. If anyone had actually come up to me in a game and said to me in a kind of competitive tournament setting, or even a casual setting, definitely in a casual setting, and said, oh, I think you're fine, though, because of vertical distances, even though I'm 9 away from you, I actually only need to roll an 8 to charge you because geometry, I'd be like, wow, we're getting into that, are we? Cool.
So for context, in the previous core book errata and FAQ, they gave a diagram of if you deep strike onto the top of a building, you can be 9 inches away, sort of on a diagonal, because that's what's required. But due to vertical engagement, you actually only need to move the horizontal distance, which could only be say 6 inches or 7 inches. And they said that's totally fine and legit, until someone else pointed out very recently, in fact, that things like raiders, for example, you measure to the hole, I think. So you can actually go underneath them. So you would do that 9-inch triangle measurement, but actually only have to move the horizontal difference. So instead of needing a 9, you kind of just need like an 8 point something or other or an 8. So actually you're rolling less. But that was only created because of the whole deep striking from ruins clarification from the last errata. So this is just resetting it back to, if you deep strike 9 inches away, you have to roll a 9.
Which is beautiful. It is a simple, easy clarification, which delivers us the desired result, which is the way the deep strike, or rather the reserves mechanic, was intended to work, is that you should always, under all circumstances, be needing to roll a 9 in order to charge. Now, where that gets interesting, I suppose, is with very big vertical terrain. So now you end up in kind of situations where you have to account for that verticality. But then it's weird because I've heard people talk about the vertical terrain and how that works, but that was how I played it anyway, right? Like, the idea would be that, like, you'd have to be up away 9 vertically. That just seemed logical to me. But then again, I worry a lot about how sometimes we as a community can warp and confuse things, because it's just very odd. It's a whole odd thing. But anyway, long story short, when you come in from reserves for whatever reason, if you want to charge something, you're going to need to roll a 9 unless you can buff your charge roll somehow.
Yeah, so I think reading it through, that they change it slightly. So it isn't you measure diagonally for your 9 inches. They're now saying you measure horizontally for your 9 inches regardless. So you can still benefit from the vertical engagement. So that bit works, but you will still horizontally be 9 inches away. So inherently you will need to roll that 9, basically. So actually those models won't be as close to those ruins, for example, as they used to be.
Yeah, which is, again, sensible, I think. I mean,
a good change.
Very good change. There's something about every unit in your army and how that affects your abilities, and now essentially the summoning units doesn't break that, because there was like stipulations before that if you were like Death Guard and you summoned a unit of Nurgle demons, that all of a sudden you would lose your innate abilities for having pure detachments, because as soon as they came into play, that broke that stipulation. Whereas now essentially it occurs at the point of mustering your army. So, hey, I've got all my stuff together. I am battle forged. I fulfill the criteria at the point that I brought this to the table. But should I choose to summon some demons, I'm not then going to lose those benefits, which is the right call in my decision. Again, a very sensible, logical decision. Although, interestingly, Phil, we were having this conversation the other day. If you do summon a unit of Plague Bearers, for example, which is a troop choice within the Demon Codex, doesn't actually get OBSEC, which is interesting, because OBSEC is a benefit that the demon would get from being in its own Battleforged detachment. And even though it is in a Battleforged detachment of Death Guard, it's not in a demon Battleforged detachment, thus no OBSEC, which is kind of weird. But anyway, whole thing. But look, I mean, it's a sensible, simple decision. Works. Good stuff. I don't know if you've got anything you want to expand on there, Phil. You in the business of summoning demons? I suppose you've, rocked a makeshift Eisenhorn on occasion.
Well, yes, he does summon a demon, although I'm pretty sure now it isn't classed as summoning. He just appears as an ability, so it doesn't really affect me.
Just clicks his fingers and there he is.
Exactly.
Like whistling for a mount in various video games. They just miraculously appear regardless of distance.
Indeed.
There we go. Good. Apparently they also clarified some abilities around, the deployment phase. So start of deployment phase abilities are declared before declaring transports and reserves or something. Again, I'm not really sure where that ever would become a thing or a problem that needed additional clarification, but I'm sure there's something that I'm missing that makes that whole sequence of events valuable. Can you think of anything?
I think in the references they're talking about particular abilities and when they happen, like warlord traits that and stuff like that. So now they've just defined it as there's at the start of deployment, during deployment, and after deployment. As like these 3 predefined stages at which point these abilities or warlord traits or whatever it might be happen at these particular points, just to break it down, rather than, because I guess if you've got stuff that, and your opponent's also got stuff that happen and you're sort of going to and fro, it could be quite important the order in which you're deploying stuff down, for example.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, so in those instances, this is valuable. But I think most people were fairly accommodating with those kinds of abilities, so I don't feel like it's a massive cause for concern. And then the other one as well that probably doesn't require very much conversation is having the same psychic disciplines. I have to be honest, Phil, I don't know whether I was mad for thinking it, but I was one of the few people that was already in the camp that the Tome of Malkador meant that you were only supposed to add an additional psychic power from your already established, psychic discipline. But everyone kept telling me, no, it means you can take a Librarius discipline and a insert other discipline, I don't know, the Blood Angels discipline or whatever. And I was always like, that doesn't seem right to me. It kind of feels like the intent is you just get another psychic power.
Yes, yeah. And you turned out to be correct. What a surprise.
Because I'm so great. Is that what you're saying?
No, just because it was clearly the non-gamey answer.
Yes.
Which, for you, I'm surprised. You went down
I'm surprised too. I don't know. It was weird though. When you read it and you start to get into the mindset of how 40k terminology kind of comes around, you do look at it and go, well, clearly that's, well, not clearly, but that's how I feel they would intend it. And obviously that was how they intended it, because that's where it's landed. I mean, it's made the Tome of Malkador now a much less desirable relic. I think you're going to see that a lot less. Going to be a few more burning blades doing the rounds in those Marines.
That burning blade.
Oh, mate, you can't get enough of that burning blade. Sprinkle it on anything. Any army having a bit of a problem, burning blade, that'll sort you right out. Do you want to talk about difficult ground and Titanic stuff?
I'll talk about the one just above that, which is setting up strategic reserve units. So this is the ability where you can actually, if you're in strategic reserve, you can always deploy into your deployment zone. But there's an ability which allows you to deploy within 1 inch of your opponent, so you can deploy into engagement range. Now, it used to be you used to have your units used to need to be within 1 inch of your battlefield edge. So what that would allow you to do is you place one model within your battlefield edge within 1 inches. You could then daisy chain a very large unit several more inches into your deployment zone and then tag a unit in combat as your kind of booby trap. Now they've just clarified that it's every model in that unit has to be within 1 inches of your own battlefield edge. I mean, it feels like such a weird rule that is never gonna be used. It's an interesting mechanic, but it's it's good because the daisy chaining thing was nonsense, but the actual bonus that this gives you is kind of pointless. I think it's so niche.
Well, it's good that they address the niche scenarios as much as anything else, though, right? And I think that's the thing. There's always you don't know what the release schedule looks like and what the kind of things could be in the future and where there could be opportunities to potentially exploit this in some way, shape, or form.
That's true. Yeah. The next one, difficult ground. Basically, it mostly features craters. So difficult ground, subtract 2 inches from normal move, advance move, fallback moves for units, with the exception of fly. They've now said it excludes Titanic units if the terrain feature is less than 3 inches in height, i.e. craters. So basically this just allows knights to move over craters without that 2 inch penalty.
2 inch. Which is sensible, because why would a Titanic unit be bothered by a little bit of a divot in the floor?
Oh yeah, totally.
Which again, I mean, maybe with some trees or something, maybe if they were especially strong looking trees, maybe that could have had some impact. We've been actually house ruling it that we only subtracted the 2 from charges and advances, because again it was really punishing for for certain things. But yeah, I mean, again, difficult ground is a bit of a weird one. It's definitely becoming more prevalent within the kind of competitive space, because I think a lot of TOs now have sort of settled on this deployment map that includes these situated areas of difficult ground to try and, I suppose, impact movement, which yet again amplifies the value of fly keyword miniatures. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, it's a sensible change, and yet another reason why an Imperial Knight army has been given a little bit of a boost, which is nice.
Yeah. But again, that's another rule that isn't in your terrain book of your GT mission pack. So if you look for difficult terrain, it will be missing this bit. So it's a bit like, thanks Games Workshop for not including it, but okay.
Excellent work. What's the next one, Phil?
So always fight first, fight last. This also comes with a separate designer.
I was going to say,
to explain it all.
I mean, can we just say again, right? Because I know we're banging this drum a lot, but like, how is this better than an initiative system? Like, I'm just getting to the point where I'm like, this is crazy.
I mean,
like
I think it's not been very well explained because it's very wordy, but basically it's a 3-step initiative process. You fight first, you fight at normal, or you fight last. Those are the 3 sort of states that your models can be in, basically. If you fight first, it's if I remember rightly, it's the controlling players pick. So they get to pick a unit to go first, and you alternate between those that fight first. Charge equals fight first. They've clarified that.
Correct. Yep.
Fight normal. Now that's your normal people. You know, they've been charged. They're fighting normal, or they're people that have the fight first rule and the fight last rule. And when you fight in normal, it's the person who isn't the controlling player's turn gets the first pick, which is normally the person, for example, that charged the previous turn, for example. And then fight last is the very last step. It's when people are chosen to fight last, or if it's people that can't be chosen, that aren't eligible to be picked until the end, for example, which all count as fight last now. So they've clarified different.
Who picks who goes first in the fight last pile?
I believe it's the controlling player's turn.
Okay, so the controlling player picks in the first and the last,
yeah,
but not in the normals.
I believe so.
I mean, consistency is everything, right?
Well, it sort of makes sense, because if you got 5 first, you want to benefit the person whose turn it is that is probably switching on those activations. But for the fight normal, you want to benefit the person that charged the last turn, so it needs to be them. But you're right, it's not consistent.
So say, for example, I'm playing Slanesh and I've got a fight first ability, and then, you know, as part of that, I've also got some regular demons that fight normal. So in that sort of scenario, right, like, so essentially you can now enter into a situation where you, as the opposing player, can activate twice, because your opponent charges a Slanesh unit, and then the Slanesh unit is part of the fighting first bracket, and then you resolve that after the charging unit or the opponent does it, and then you move into what's the normal phase, and then you activate, and then you move into the last phase, which, I mean, again, it's as clear as mud, mate. I mean, well done them. I mean, like, you know, good on you. What a way to make combat just an absolute mess. Thank God it's not a comprehensively, or not comprehensively, thank God it's not a massive part of your competitive gameplay experience, because otherwise this would get really irritating.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing they've also clarified is the counter-offensive stratagem. Basically, you can't play that if you've under the effects that say basically you're not eligible to fight until all other eligible units have done so. So you can't use that to effectively jump the queue.
And again, so they've added additional wording to a stratagem that, again, isn't going to be updated in any actual literature, maybe until next year. So it's all in FAQ. And then it completely goes against the grade. So essentially, you can use it to interrupt if you're residing within the normal phase.
Yeah, or well, I guess if you're
So if I'm charged by...
say you're a Slanesh and you've got fight first, but you've been charged and they have fight first and you have, say, 2 units that have both been charged, under normal circumstances, you would, I guess they would go first and alternate. Would it really change anything? Maybe it wouldn't.
Because here's the thing, right? I get charged by 3 units, right? They don't even have to be Slanesh at this point, but then they become go first criteria. I can't interrupt them.
No, so you could interrupt with something that's under your normal fight normal, for example.
But that wouldn't be fight normal. They'd be going first because they now have counts as fight first.
So yeah, so the counter offensive stratagem is like an interrupt, right? So you can be, I think, anywhere within that. You can even be the effects of fight last, but what it's saying is you can't be under the effects of you're not eligible to fight until all other eligible units have done so, and not on those effects.
Right. Okay. So sorry. It's one of the situations where you're fighting last. You can't then use the interrupt.
Yes, but I guess it's not all fight last. It's a specifically worded fight last.
Oh, goody. I'm glad that's clear.
Because there's 2 types of fight last. There's ones that say you must fight last, and there's ones that say you're not eligible to fight until all other units have done so. They're saying this is all counts as fight last, but for the purposes, I guess, of the counter-offensive stratagem, if you're just told to fight last, you could maybe use this to do the counter-offensive. But if you're not eligible to fight, then you can't use it.
Did the rules writing team, when they came up with this, turn up with their briefcases filled with shredded newspaper? It's like the most insane. I mean, okay, fair enough. I'm sure this makes sense, right? I'm sure once you dive into it.
I think the problem honestly, is they used a bunch of different the rules for fighting first, fighting last. They've been inconsistent with the terminology for them, and that was either deliberate to differentiate between fighting last and not being able to pick a unit to fight until everyone else has fought. But they're now saying that's one and the same. But when it comes to the counter-offensive stratagem, it's slightly different, I believe.
So, in a way, without wanting to sound all big and clever, right? One of the things I've consistently said about 8th and then now subsequently 9th edition 40k is the worst thing about it is the combat system, because it's awful, right? It has no nuance, it has no cleverness to it. And obviously what Games Workshop have found themselves in the situation of is they've basically realized that one of the core mechanics of earlier editions of 40k was having units with the ability to fight first, and that was easily managed by having high initiative values or an ability that gave them an initiative value of 10 or whatever, right? Like there were ways and means that they did it. Now they've essentially decided that, we really like those mechanics when things fight first, but we also like mechanics when things have to fight last. We like mechanics when, and it's like, it's such a patchwork. It's like you're just layering stuff on top of something that isn't fit for purpose. It's like, here's an idea, right? If you know from the outset that one of the ideas that you want to express consistently in all of your books going forwards is a system by which you manipulate the order in which people fight, maybe bake it into your core rules and come up with something that makes sense from the outset.
Well, this is the thing. It feels like this should have been in the 9th edition core rulebook under the fight phase, where they go, this is the structure of the fight phase. You've got your fight first phase, which includes charging. You've got your normal fight phase, and then you got your fight last phase. In the same, is a bit like the table for strength and toughness. It's like if it's slightly higher, you roll this number. If it's slightly lower, you roll this number, and it's effectively a 3-step initiative process. And it's like, because it's not in the core rules, they've tucked it away into this rare rule section, and it kind of bloats the amount of explanation that's needed. For it, basically,
it's utterly confusing, and it's unnecessarily confusing. It's like, guys, just come up with an initiative system. Like, it's so easy. And all of a sudden, like, I'm not suggesting that we need to go back to a situation where, you know, we have challenges and we have the incorporation of the Lookout Sir situation into that, which is the old Lookout Sir, where you could tank wounds for characters even when they were in challenges and all this kind of stuff. I'm just saying, just have an initiative value and just give stuff that's good in needs to go first in combat, that, and get rid of the whole charging goes first situation, because charging goes first could maybe, here's a mad idea, just give you an additional like plus to your initiative or something. Again, you know, I don't want to be crazy, because I know obviously you don't want to make the rules complicated, despite the fact that you've got secondaries that make no sense. And this is like, what is this? I'm sorry. I'm so bitter about this rule set in terms of the combat sequence. It's horrible. It's utterly horrible. And the fact that I now have this explanation here combined with 2 additional sheets on a PDF with diagrams, it's literally like, guys, how do you think this is good?
Yeah, like, I mean, the other one with the diagrams is just explanations, for example.
Yeah, of course, it's more, but again, necessary explanations, because it's really confusing, right? I mean, if it wasn't necessary, would they have done it?
True.
So I don't know. I don't want to be the guy that just, you know, gets angry about this stuff or gets agitated by it, but it's just funny to me. It's like, guys, come on. Like, how did you end up here? Like, this is, and we're not even now, well, maybe we're just approaching a year of 9th edition and this exists. It's like, wow, what a way to illustrate that this system is not fit for purpose. It's great. Anyway, there you go. Always fights first and last. Horrible. Well done, them. Awful. Right, next. Resurrected models. This was another one that sort of spun me for a loop for a bit, but Phil managed to make stuff make sense. You know, destroyed models that are returned basically don't count as having lost wounds for the purposes of some weird interaction where they miraculously, instantaneously return. If it's a thing that occurs at the end of the phase or happens at the end of the turn, then obviously you don't need to take this stuff into account. But it's effectively the weird rule instances where something is resurrected instantaneously and has a reduced amount of wounds, but for the purposes of resolving ongoing combats or ongoing shooting or ongoing something, is considered as having lost no wounds, even though it had. About right, Phil?
Yeah, because normally you have to allocate a wound to a model that's already lost wounds.
Yes.
But even if a model comes back alive, even on full wounds, I guess the assumption was you would have to allocate it to that model because it did lose wounds. This is just saying, well, it hasn't, because it's a new model.
So what happens? So here's the expanded question there. So what happens when I end up in a rare situation where now all of a sudden I've got one model on 1 wound and one model and 2 wounds because of this strange interaction, if it ever happened like that? Or at that point, it's just up to me who then takes that wound?
I assume if it comes back on 1 wound, you would actually still have to put it on that model. This is really just covering when a model comes back on full wounds. You can then pick another one to allocate wounds to, as opposed to that one.
Good. All right. I don't know if there's any more to say about that. It's very weird, but fine.
A very niche one,
yeah. Attacks generating more attacks. I mean, this is obviously, you see that there, Succubus? No. None of that.
Yes, it's almost weird that it's in here, because pretty much every explanation of attacks that make multiple hit rolls say they can't generate multiple attacks anyway, and that was just an oversight of the wording of that one particular thing. So rather than update that data sheet, they've just updated I've created a rare rule to explain it, basically, to say that you can't generate multiple attacks, which is sensible.
Very sensible. It's still a really good warlord trait for that Succubus, though, right? Like, it's still viable. I think what's really nice about that as a decision is it preserves the sort of spirit of it while making it less ridiculous, which is the right way to approach FAQs and to kind of, you know, settle these situations. So I like that overall, you know. Give them some positives, even though I've been negative about some stuff, you know. I'm not always just completely negative about all of it. much like the counts as stationary rule that they've essentially ruled on, which is that if you have an ability that allows you to count as stationary, because counting as stationary now is its own individual state of movement, you always count as stationary regardless of how you arrived at that form. So effectively, if you have an ability that enables you to be count as stationary, even if you fell back from combat, you are now still stationary. Interestingly, doesn't work for Ultramarines, because Ultramarines specifically have baked into their rule about remaining stationary that it doesn't apply if they fell back. But if you are a Tau player and you're using what's it called?
I think it's the Tau sets. Oh, the Montclair, sorry.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, the point is you do that thing after you fall back, and then you count as being stationary, so you can fall back from combat and shoot as if you remain stationary, which is pretty exciting.
If you, for example, you had a universal rule that says you always count as remaining stationary, it means you can advance and you don't suffer any penalties for shooting assault weapons. You can move heavy weapons and always fire them as infantry without penalty. You can fall back and charge. You can fall back and shoot. It would allow you to do a crazy amount of stuff. But most of the rules, I think, that cover it tend to have some kind of stipulations on which phase, for example, it can be used in.
Yeah. There's also another stipulation around the fact that it will never work on a reinforcement. So if you arrive from reinforcements, you never count as stationary. So it creates some interesting interactions with the idea of, say, for example, if you brought in a transport vehicle, for example, you would have moved to arrive there. So now you can't then sort of use weird stuff to maybe disembark the unit because you're not stationary at this point. You've counted as moved. But also specifically things like, say, like Ultramarine Devastator squads coming in from a drop pod. That drop pod comes in, the specific rules are you have to disembark as soon as it comes along. But because you arrive from reinforcements, even if you did so in turn 2, you would still count as having moved.
It's the same with, I guess, Ultramarine Eradicators coming on from strategic reserve, right? Like, you wouldn't be able to double shoot because even though you count stationary, you've cut your reserve, so you've considered to move your max movement.
Well, you would be able to double shoot with Eradicators because the rule for Eradicators double shooting isn't brought into effect by them remaining stationary. It's about them picking the same target for all three members.
Yeah, I was thinking sort of the old aggressors.
You were thinking aggressors. Yeah.
But then that changed, so I was like, oh no, it must be Eradicators.
No, yeah. So it's similar but different. So yeah. But no, I mean, a good clarification though, and certainly something that can have a lot of really quite meaningful gameplay situations. So yeah, no, I'm in favor of that. I think that's a good ruling and something that makes sense because they have introduced the idea that being stationary is its own state. So I do think under those circumstances it makes sense. What's next, Phil?
Oh god, it's psychic powers that modify characteristics that have additional effects based on the psychic test. I believe this is if you have a psychic power that boosts your say your leadership value, you can't then use that leadership value to cast the next psychic power to make that one easier.
I think it's more about examples of where you do say you do damage and then you reduce someone's characteristics. So say if it's like, oh, they need to take a leadership test on 3d6 and if you roll over their leadership on 3d6, you do 1 damage, but also their leadership is reduced by 1. The way they've ruled it now is the damage comes first. So, i.e., you need to roll it before the reduction, and then the reduction happens. So, essentially, if you were leadership 9, I'd still need to roll over 9, and then after the damage is concluded, you become leadership 8.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense.
If that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of the. And then ultimately, if then you follow up with other abilities, then you are still leadership 8. So at that point, if you did something else that affected you based on your leadership characteristic, you would still be reduced, which is it's a thing. I suppose. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example where that actually happens. I kind of made that one up on the fly, but I think there is psychic powers. Maybe it's I feel like there's psychic powers linked to the Dark Angels that have something to do with that. But I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. Maybe it's Mind Worm. I feel like Mind Worm.
I know. I feel like sometimes they need a context of an example to explain which things actually. What are the rules that are broken that is making this rare rule actually take effect?
Yeah, can you just give me some context here? What is it that is making this thing a thing? But I guess maybe they worry that at some point they might then FAQ the rule, and then the people will be like saying, well, it says here in the big FAQ that this is how the rule works. Oh, yes, but you need to then refer to the... I don't know. I'm sure there's reasons. What's next, Phil?
So preventing losing objectives secured. This basically says that rules that prevent objectives secured trump abilities that gain you objectives secured.
I mean, it makes absolute sense, right? Like, of course, the ability, because I suppose there's very few abilities that will give you guaranteed obsec in that sense. The obsec abilities tend to just be, you know, oh, I'm a unit that gains obsec. So, like, I don't know, an Imperial Knight character that counts as 10 models.
Or there's like a banner ancient or a warlord trait that can give, for Space Marines, it can give you a unit's objective secured. But then if you come across an aura ability that takes that away, then it's lost. You can't say, oh, but this thing gives it back to them.
Yes. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Again, sensible ruling on that front. Modifying CP costs of stratagems. The example that comes to mind for this is in the case of Agents of Vect, I suppose. So Agents of Vect is probably the most common CP increase, but you've also got things like the Caluxus Assassin, or Caladas Assassin, sorry, who increases your CP costs, and there's some other stuff out there, but the point is like probably the way Agents of Vect works is that you increase the CP cost of a stratagem, and then that CP increase applies for the entire game. And then what that basically means is, in the way that they've ruled it, is that if a rule instructs you to change the cost, you do that first. So you first modify the cost, then multiply the cost first, then you do the additions and subtractions. So you basically resolve what the cost is, then you do the multiples, then you do the adds. So essentially, if you're an apothecary that's going to do the selfless healer ability that's 0 CP because you're a chief apothecary, it will now cost you 1. Where it gets interesting, actually, in my example, is will that apply every turn on Agents of Vect? Because technically, the way that stratagem reads is it costs me 0. So the fact that the CP cost is increased in future instances might then get nullified by the fact that the thing says that it now costs me 0. But the way they've ruled this suggests that it's actually the former, not the latter.
Yeah, so it costs you 0, but it costs +1, and then I guess potentially it just repeats every turn.
Yeah, so Agents of X is weird because you do it once, but then it has a recurring effect. So it's a weird stratagem like that. But the point is that, you know, because it's a weird rule that exists with other weird rule instances, it resides here within the rare rule section, not the weird rule section, which might have been a fabulous name for it. I mean, do you feel like I explained that with relative competency, Phil? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Why not? It sounds about right. And then moving minimum distances is the last thing, right, Phil?
If you say so.
Well, for I don't know. It feels like it's the last thing, unless you've got other stuff you want to drag up.
Yes. So it's normally there's terms of flyers, for example. It basically means if you've got to move minimum of 20, you can't, for example, move 20 inches forward, 20 inches backwards, or sorry, 10 inches forwards, 10 inches backwards, and end up in the same spots. And you go, but I've moved 20 inches. It now clarifies that the start position and the end position needs to be that distance. Quite often this might appear, for example, is if you're a flyer and you can pivot mid-flight. So due to lovely trigonometry, you can move 10 forwards, pivot 90 degrees, move another 10. You've technically moved 20, but you've actually less than 20 between your start point and end point. So it's for things like that, basically. Which is good, because in the main core rules, they never explain how movement works. It's always been up to everyone to their own interpretation in terms of how am I allowed to walk in a circle, for example? Does that count as my movement? Here it's saying no, but they are actually saying for the explicit purposes of you've got to have moved X number of inches.
Yeah, you still have some of those strange instances where if you gain a benefit from advancing, but you don't want to move anywhere, though you can declare you advance a unit and just not move it, because technically you are suffering the penalty for having done that advance. But a lot of the units that madly benefited from advancing and gaining benefits were very 8th edition centric, because it was things like Hornets, for example, from the Craftworld Aeldari, where they could become -2 to be hit by just advancing. So I did that a lot when I was running those guys in 8th edition, where I'd just be like, I'm not going anywhere, but I've declared I'm advancing because, that's fun. So there you go. I think that's pretty much it in terms of the FAQ. Obviously, there's bunches of, or bundles of other FAQs that affect specific armies, lots of new updates and things that have come into effect for different bits and pieces. But yeah, I thought it was interesting they clarified teleport homers, watchers in the dark, and Armirium cherubs or whatever it was in combat squads, because you get one of those in the unit and then you combat squad it. But because it's essentially a token, it resides in this kind of ethereal place where it's not assigned to a unit, it's assigned to the whole unit. And then when you combat squad, either of the combat squads can utilize those items, which I thought was quite interesting.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, but then beyond that, there's a bunch of other stuff in there in terms of updating Forge World units to have power from pain in the case of the Drakari, and a bunch of other bits and pieces in there as well. So again, we could get into every little bit and piece, but it's not really necessary, I don't imagine. I mean, obviously, if there's some specific things you'd like to hear about in the future, feel free to throw us some questions, and we'll always try and address those in future episodes or whatever. But there you go, Phil. That was our little romp through the world of rules. It's rare these days that we go heavy into exclusively rulesy content, although I suppose Codex reviews have a bit of that to their nature. But yeah, how do you think that went, mate?
Not too bad. It's weirdly, as you said, I think the rules in Errata is the most exciting thing. It's not the GT mission pack or the new secondaries. While they're okay, it's like the way you actually play the game is more interesting, and that kind of came out with sort of not much of a song and dance about it. It was just like, oh, here you go, it's here.
Yeah, thanks very much. Here's your FAQs and things. I mean, again, it's great to see it because, it's good to get those things clarified. I appreciate that I still have some grumbly concerns about the combat sequence, because I just think there's more elegant solutions to that situation. But hey, we are where we are. Hopefully at some point they'll come up with a more comprehensive way of expressing that idea. But for now, it is what it is. And then everything else just made sense, right? Like when you're going through it all, it's just like, well, yeah, that seems logical, which is nice, because that's really where you want it to be. You want everything to seem obvious, I suppose, which is very much what the FAQ achieved. So yeah, in that regard, I'm very happy with it. I think it does a lot of good for the game, which is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, there you go. Phil, do we want to do an outro segment, or are you struggling? Should we just end it here?
Let's do a quick outro.
Transitional noise. Woo! So due in part to the way that our fabulous recording software works, we are now re-recording this outro on the Friday when we had recorded the majority of the content on the Thursday. But the good news is one day removed from yesterday, Phil is seemingly much better than he was the day before. So if any of you were concerned about Phil's general, well-being based on everything that he said, you're doing a lot better today, right, Phil?
Exactly. The miracle of antibiotics.
They are a miracle, although scarily, Phil, there are, new bacteria out there that can ignore the effects of it, right?
Apparently so, yeah. Won't that be lovely? Yeah.
Wow. I mean, not if you're one of the poor people that find yourself with one of those in you. But let's just hope that never happens to be any of us or anyone out there who enjoys the show.
Exactly.
Or anyone in general.
You'll be a goner.
Well, potentially. You might just have, natural immunities and so on and so forth. Who can say for certain? Anyway, this is the end of the show. We didn't have any specific agenda for it. When we recorded this yesterday, we went on a tangent talking about the Naughty Boys from the new Age of Sigmar box set, because they're quite an interesting
the Cruel Boys.
Sorry, the Cruel Boys. The Cruel Boys.
I do like your name for it, though.
Well, the Naughty Boys. They do have the appearance of naughty boys, though, right? They're a silly group. But yeah, no, we were discussing those because it's quite an interesting divergence for the orc range, because for as long as there have been orcs, they've always kind of had these kind of universal visuals, as it were. I feel like, in the early years of Warhammer 40,000 and by extension Warhammer Fantasy Battles, orcs were these kind of grimacing, comical creatures that were, more comic relief than they were kind of the modern interpretation where they're will up for a fight and Space Marine and all that sort of terminology. So yeah, I feel like that was sort of the early stages, and then towards the late 90s in Third Ed, they redefined the kind of look of the orc, and then by extension, the orc took on that look in fantasy and carried through to Age of Sigmar. And what they've been doing with orcs in Age of Sigmar with the Iron Jaws has very much still been in the same kind of vein of what orcs have been and what we've seen with, obviously, the Beast Snaggers, is that these orcs still kind of feel very similar to that established template. But these guys, the Naughty Boys, my goodness, they're a real, change of pace, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really different. To me, they instantly came across as being much more inspired by the Lord of the Ring movies, like the orcs from there, or Orokai. Sort of much sleeker, slimmer, but very different faces, which is a bit weird to see in Age of Sigmar or fantasy or Warhammer in general. Like, it's a very distinct look.
Yeah, I mean, I like it in the sense of I like it conceptually. I don't necessarily feel like I like the miniatures, especially. I'm not feeling overly engaged with the range based on what they've shown so far. But I do like the fact that they're trying different things, and I do like the fact that, much like with a lot of the things they've done with Age of Sigmar, they're clearly trying to innovate and do new stuff with it, which is really cool. But I have to be honest, this whole new box set they've got with the new Stormcasts and these new orcs is probably one of the least appealing box sets I've seen out of Games Workshop in a long time. I was really torn by the second edition Age of Sigmar Night Haunt and Wizard KP Stormcast Eternals.
Like this Celestine Chamber or something like that, wasn't it?
Something along those lines.
Chamber? I don't know.
But the point is that as a box set looked really compelling. Like the Night Haunt miniatures were gorgeous. I mean, I still really love a lot of that range. I think the only thing that stopped me from buying any of that Night Haunt stuff and getting on that train was when I actually saw the miniatures in real life and realized how flimsy they were, because they were essentially these top-heavy ghost models held up by a little spindly bit of ghosty tail, as it were. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to survive any kind of transportation. That's just...
I did really like I still do love the Night Haunt range. I think the thing that kind of put me off is it's very much like a horde army, and I was like, if I'm getting into AOS, I want to paint as little as possible, basically, because I know I'm a slow painter. And you can contrast them and dry brush them, and I've seen some really cool stuff like that. I was like, even so. So yeah, I don't know. I've got some ideas for future 40k projects using some of the cool Nighthawk minis that I want to do at some point one day in the far-flung future, probably when I'm retired. But yeah, the current range of the new Dominion box. What's interesting about it is both the Stormcast Eternals and the Orcs, or the Cool Boys, like they don't really fit in the AOS range, I don't think.
No, not
visually,
at all.
They look very different. Like the Stormcast are much more sort of true scale, even more so than the rest of the AOS range. The armor's slender and much more, I don't know, human. It's a bit hard to define, but it definitely looks different. And as you said before, the Orcs are really like stocky, kind of bulky figures, but now these guys are a lot more slender, and everything's so intricate and detailed. They come across much more, especially the Orc stuff, like much more, or the larger models, right? They come across much more as like figurine pieces as opposed to tabletop miniatures, because they just come across as so detailed. Yeah, there's something really different about them, but I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's always good to have range and choice and variety. And does it really matter if, one army against another army doesn't look right? I mean, it seems a bit weird because obviously every army is distinctly different, but visually they always seem to fit in next to each other. And maybe these will once you see them on the tabletop, but when you see them in isolation, they seem, I don't know, just not quite AOS, but it's hard to explain what it is that makes it that.
Yeah, I think the thing is there is distinctly something a little bit more realistic about the sculpts and the poses. That it's not heroic scale, I think, is actually what you're seeing, which is that, a lot of the AOS minis, a lot of the 40k minis, even though they are, upscaling them, they still have these kind of heroic proportions in some regards. I remember there was a How to Draw the Marvel Way art book I had as a kid that showed the very subtle differences between how Marvel Comics draws a superhero versus what real life proportions are.
Is it more heads per body?
Yes, essentially, or that it's less heads per body or something. So it's like the head is bigger or something, because I can't remember the specifics of exactly how that is being distinguished. But the point is that it was really interesting because they had drawn a Captain America and then juxtaposed them against a Captain America that was drawn to normal human proportions. And it's true that it is at a glance the same thing, but actually completely different in terms of how that figure appears and how it kind of has weight and function within those worlds. And I think that's the thing with what we're seeing with these minis, is they're much more scaled within more kind of, I suppose, realistic proportions. And I think that's one of the things that's quite interesting about it. Because I think it's interesting, right? Because all the previous Stormcast Eternal ranges that they've gifted us with, all the Stormcast Eternal ranges they've done, I haven't massively engaged with Age of Sigmar, and I haven't massively engaged with Stormcast Eternals, but I do definitely feel like there's a number of miniatures within the Stormcast ranges that I was seeing that I liked in some way, shape, or form, or felt like there was conversion opportunities. I mean, I can't remember his name now, but the kind of Chaplin-esque character that came in the very first Age of Sigmar box with the banner and then the kind of black armor and the skeleton, the skull helmet and a hammer. I don't remember what that thing was called, but it was a gorgeous miniature. And immediately you're like, oh, there's so many opportunities to potentially represent that as maybe, something in 40k, or just have the miniature because it's gorgeous. So there was that to the range, whereas this is the first time with the Stormcast where nothing in the selection appeals to me at all. Like, I look at all of it and just think, it's not really for me.
I quite like them. Like,
well, okay, with the exception of maybe the new Terminator-esque guys that they've got, the big chunky ones with the big round shields and the big kind of swoopy shoulder areas. Maybe them, but otherwise, no. I'm genuinely relatively unimpressed by them. For me personally, they're just not to my taste, Phil. I don't know. What do you think?
that's fair enough. I mean, yeah, I do like them. Yeah, the big sort of almost like Gravis Terminator style ones look super cool. And then the slightly slender armor. I mean, it's a bit not off-putting. It's just a bit odd because it's like you can see it's Stormcast Eternals, but somewhat different. Like they've just changed it, tweaked it. It's almost like the Phobos pattern of armor. Like it's a bit more slender and form-fitting. Some of them look great though. Yeah, I do like them. The guys with the like capes over their shoulders, they seem pretty cool. With the big, I guess, halberds, they seem all right. And
oh yeah, those. But again, it's weird, isn't it? Because they're really tall and quite lanky, and they're kind of got. It's
well, this is the thing. I'd love to see them up against the standard Stormcast minis because these do have much more like human proportions. So it'd be good to see how they actually just look next to the normal mini, which is much more like heroic and they're a bit more chonky boys. But like, you know, the one I really like is the one that you probably don't, which is the lady with the wings. I think that's really cool.
That's easily the one that I like the most of the range.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I didn't, but I still don't like it, right? Like, I mean, you know, to be completely real about it, it's like, yeah, sure, it's the best of it, but I still don't like it.
Yeah, I think I said on a previous episode, like the thing I really liked about it is the wings make it more realistic as opposed to what they've done before, where it's like wings of light and it's very abstract and it's like that doesn't really make sense, or it's hard to visualize. It's hard to paint that on a model or design it on a model to represent beams of light for wings. It's very weird. Whereas, you know, a human with wings we've all seen across multiple genres of, like, you know, fantasy, superheroes, stuff like that, so people instantly get it, right? The model I don't like is Lord Imperatant, because his armor's got like all these nods to the dwarves or Druidin. So it's like his helmet's like, is it grungy, I think, and then he's got little symbols that aren't Sigmar but of this dwarven god who's helped forge the armor. So to me that seems like this really weird mashup, and it's like, I get it because it's trying to represent an army that's an alliance, so it does make sense, but then just visually I think it just seems a bit weird because it's like you're taking really classic dwarf elements, not giving them to the dwarf armies and giving them to the humans instead, which seems a bit weird.
Yeah, I can understand that because that's the guy that looks like Trigger, right, from Only Fools and Horses.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right there, Dave. I've had the same brush my entire career. Changed the handle 5 times, changed the head 6 times, or whatever it was. Anyway, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, again, I'm sure there's lots of people out there who love this, and good on them, right? I think, you know, again, Age of Sigmar is becoming a more compelling proposition as time goes on. But yeah, I don't know. Again, there is literally nothing that, you know, nothing making me want to pick up this box set. Like, yeah, the last box set with the Night Haunts, I very nearly got involved. And I keep going back to the Night Haunt range and thinking, oh, actually, it's really nice. So there is like, you know, because again, you know, you could do it quickly. So if you were looking to get into AOS, the Night Haunt seemed like a good bet. But yeah, it's not doing much for me. On the topic of other things that have been previewed, though, Phil, to get back to something resembling 40k, you've seen they've put out a new Chaos-possessed Gel Vorbak for the Horus Heresy.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
That looks kind of interesting, doesn't it? Something that resembles a Chaos Space Marine being released in the year 2020. Not 2020, it's 2021. Dear me. It's June, for goodness sake. I should have known what year it is by now. Anyway, yeah, so something being released for Chaos Space Marines or Horus Heresy, but could be used for Chaos Space Marines. Fancy,
well, yeah, I think that's the trick. It's clearly not 40k.
No,
but
clearly not.
I mean, I think lots of people will be eyeing that up as a Demon Prince conversion, because it basically you don't need to do anything to convert it. It just is one of them, right?
Yeah.
I do think the wings are a bit diddy. That's
I thought that as well. I have to be honest. I like the fact that it's posed that the wings are kind of actually not just, proudly sort of upright, as it were, in a sort of, I suppose more kind of like dramatic pose, as it were. There's actually a bit of sort of movement to them that looks quite interesting. But yeah, it's a cool miniature, though. I mean, I don't know what the scale of it's going to be like. I don't know how big this guy's going to be. So whether or not he's going to be a meaningful proxy for a demon prince, but
it's hard to tell. Like, you can see he's holding a space marine, so he's going to be, I don't know, maybe if you include the wing to the top, it's probably twice as big as a space marine, if not like 2.5 times. I don't know if that's big enough, really.
I mean, you could definitely. I mean, again, you could definitely find a place for him in your army lists. I think there's plenty of opportunities for you to take it and put it in your Chaos Space Marine army, assuming you're one of the few people out there who actually is running a Chaos Space Marine army, because obviously running a Chaos Space Marine army is a bit of a mad thing to do at the moment, unless you're super passionate about Chaos Space Marines or playing Death Guard. What was I going to say? I'll tell you what is weird, though, right? And again, this has been the continuing trend, and I know we've kind of talked about this already, but it's such a non-Forge World sculpt now, isn't it?
But yeah, is it the sculpt or is it the paint job?
I don't know. It just seems so clean, doesn't it? It's like, it's weird now how Forge World seems to be more like Games Workshop or Citadel, I suppose.
I guess are they indistinguishable? Basically, they're all CAD designed. Like almost the standout of 40k. No, sorry, Forge World was everything was hand sculpted, and obviously because of that, they never moved over to CAD design. I'm just trying to think. At what point did they do it? Like, even though they use resin for a lot of stuff, some stuff is CAD designed. Like, I remember like some of the early Blood Bowl stuff at one of the Warhammer fests. The guy was like, the Minotaur Blood Bowl star player. He was like, this is my first CAD designed mini. And he sort of did that as a pet project at home, I think, to learn how to CAD, and then just, I guess, gives it to them to be like, here you go. But pretty much all the Horus Heresy stuff, maybe with the exception of some of the more recent vehicles, for example, as far as I'm aware, would all have been done by hand. All the model ranges, like all the characters, all the infantry, because most of them are at least 5+ years old, right? Anything that's that sort of like from the start of Horus Heresy, for the most part, is going to have all been like hand sculpted and stuff. So it all has that slightly imperfect, slightly wobbly look to everything, but it works.
Yeah, they're just the beautiful sculpts, a lot of the heresy stuff, and again, it's got a certain nuance to it that allows you to kind of understand that, though this is a beautifully sculpted miniature, it is very much a labor of artistry, as it were. Not to suggest that CAD design isn't artistry, but it's got a lot less room for the sculptor to inject their personality or to have those little actual human flourishes. It's very by the numbers. It's very mechanical, and that's the thing with CAD, is that it's incredible and it produces exceptional results. And in the case of the Citadel range, we have some absolutely gorgeous miniatures as a result of the influx of CAD design, and we have amazing sprue design now. And You know, I still remember the first time where you started using like the clamshell plastic character ranges where, you know, you had all these really mad abstract pieces on the sprue, and they all perfectly come together in such a fantastic way just to make a really gorgeous miniature. You know, and now they've even gotten to the point where they add all these little weird nuanced details to the sculpts where completely non-essential design elements are put into the design or put into the sculpt to show some of the inner workings. I remember when the guy who designed Abaddon the Despoiler was talking about the build, he actually was saying that, oh yeah, I just added in some of the internal workings of his armor just because I could. And it's like, okay, fair enough. You know, you're never going to see it, you're never going to care, but it's nice to know it's there.
Yeah, what I liked about that, though, is it was almost dispelling the myth of Terminators don't work in terms of proportion, and it was almost showing like, no, we have thought about it for this guy. Like, it's just the shoulder pads are really big, and you don't normally... So the arm joint isn't up by his ear hole, for example, which is what everyone assumes it is. So it's like I liked that they did that with that, and that makes sense for like such a big centerpiece model. And it was a nice little, almost like Lego moment as you build it. You get that joy of seeing this stuff. As you say, even if it's not ever going to be painted, it's just something as you construct it, you go, oh, cool, I get how this armor is designed and meant to work, and you build it as if you're almost you're a serf putting it on your Space Marine, adding the plates of armor on and stuff.
I mean, obviously the Abaddon model is so gorgeous that it works because of the scale of the mini and the whole build of it. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it, really, when you kind of forget or fail to remember that, you know, that this mini is out there and is just incredible. Because again, you rarely see it on the tabletop Abaddon, because obviously Chaos Space Marines at this moment in time are so and none of us really play Chaos Space Marines. So and even if some of us do, they don't play, you know, Chaos Space Marines. I think Tim's playing Death Guard, so you don't really ever get to see the Abaddon mini that much, but it is gorgeous. It's a fantastic piece of work, and there's a great story for how the CAD design stuff is amazing. It's just weird. Again, it's part of the Forge World identity that is again kind of eroding away with the influx of that kind of CAD design.
Yeah,
thing,
I mean, I don't
but...
mind the CAD designs much. I'm more disappointed in the paint style is replicating that kind of heavy metal style of artwork, because Forge World was very unique and different from Games Workshop with its much more kind of traditional scale model techniques in terms of painting minis. And even today, it was like I was messaging you guys and, you know, the rest of the sort of chats that we have about the Ultramarines Relic Contemptor. I was like, is this a new mini? Because I stumbled across it on the website, and the paint job on it is so pristinely Games Workshop. It made me think it was a new release. But apparently it was an old one. But the art style, the paint style they've done for it is like, looks like it's Forge World plastic, which is sort of Games Workshop plastic, that kind of heavy metal art style. So I found it really confusing, and it's like, wow, it's a really nice, clean sculpt in and of itself. But
it's a great kit.
Yeah, I think the paint style is like, that's something Forge World should be able to kind of control in terms of keeping it more weathered and dirty to distinguish the two.
But a lot of the old Forge World painters have gone now, right? Because your buddy Giuseppe, he's left, and I imagine many others have followed suit, and they probably just ported people over from the heavy metal team and went, yeah, cool, we need painters to do our stuff. So.
Yeah, or they just collaborate much more closely, or or maybe they think they need to follow on from that in-house art style and be consistent and we're one company. Forge World isn't, for example, maybe it's being treated less and less of its own independent company, and more it's a department within one company. So therefore they want a consistent paint style across everything, like whether it's specialist games, you know, Necromunda, Blood Bowl, 40k AOS, it's the same art style throughout. Maybe it's just easiest to do it that way, and that's therefore branded as Games Workshop as a whole.
Which makes sense. But it's part of it, their personality there that's just not quite as it was before. But anyway,
Indeed.
I reckon that'll probably do, Phil. Next week, episode 90. What are we going to be talking about in episode 90?
Well, it's got to be Sisters of Battle.
The Adeptus Sororitas. I feel as if it has to be talked about. So we'll be doing that in episode 90. So hopefully you come along and enjoy the ride. But until then, guys, goodbye.
Bye-bye.